You. Good evening. Welcome, councillors, to this meeting of the Planning and Licensing Committee of the 12th of December 2023. Welcome to members of the public who have joined us in person. And welcome to those who are following the meeting via Zoom. May I remind you the committee meetings are held in public and are not a public meeting. So members of the public are only allowed to observe. If any inappropriate behaviour does occur, those individuals will be asked to leave the chamber. As always, please can those speaking ensure their microphones are switched on for the benefit of those listening online. And to the members of the public, if you're here to observe or speak to a particular agenda item, please feel free to leave the meeting once the item has been concluded. On to the agenda proper. Do we have any apologies, David?
Councillor Wise sent apologies, and I've been told Councillor Wilby is running slightly late, so he should be on his way.
Councillor Wilby will have to take part in the debate of the one after he gets here. Minutes from the meeting of the 7th of November 2023. Has anybody got any comments or amendments? If not, can somebody present please propose those minutes? Thank you, Karen, and seconder. Thank you, Kevin. All those in favour?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Would anybody like to declare any interest on any of the agenda items? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Application 2023/0944/FUL. The applicant is my agricultural contractor, so I will take no part in that part of the meeting, and will leave the surrounds of this area and sit at the back.
Thank you. Did I see another hand? Councillor Smith. Microphone, please.
Shall I declare an interest on item 2023-0847 LBA? It concerns Councillor Johnson. I'm on the cabinet with him. Does that
I think if we all declared an interest with people I knew within the council, we would get no business done.
Okay,
So I think
fine,
that's fine.
clarified it for me? Thank you.
Petitions, deputations, and questions. The deputations will be heard with the relevant application. I've also agreed as chair to move application 5C0892 full to the beginning of the agenda, as the board member has another meeting to get to. So if we move on to planning applications, first application is 0892 full. I believe Mr. Paul Milne is going to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, this application is in relation to the variation of conditions 2 and 3 and the removal of condition 6 of application 2023/74/4. Members may recall, this is the property outlined in red. The members may recall that in recent times, maybe about 2 committees ago, we approved an application for various alterations and extensions to this property. It was approved subject to various conditions. The conditions we're looking at today are the approved plans condition, which is condition 2, a landscaping condition, which is condition 3, and a restricted parking condition, which is condition 6. This was the plan that was approved in relation to the parking and landscaping. And as you can see, I'll get the pointer. It showed 2 parking spaces in that location there. Condition 2, the approved plans condition, referred to this plan reference number, as did condition 3, which was the landscaping condition. You can see the various green circles on that plan. And condition 6 will also referred to this drawing number, as it restricted the parking to 2. And this particular condition, condition 6, was at the request of members at the time of determining the application. This is the new plan, which members are considering tonight. And as you can see in this location here, this shows now parking for 4 vehicles. And as a result, the new drawing number has been placed in condition number 2. The landscaping reference number now says this plan in condition 3, and condition 6 is being removed altogether. So it will be approved, should members approve it, in accordance with this approved plan, which will now go into condition 2. Just to remind members, this is what the property looked like before conversion. As you can see, the access drive going between the 2 properties. And here we are Post conversion, this will see the access in here and the parking arrangement in between. This is the application dwelling. This is a neighbouring property. And the access runs through here across the green and into the driveway where the 4 parking spaces will be. And this is the access from the green that I was discussing, but turn left into the application drive. This is a close-up showing you the parking arrangement to the side of the property. The neighbouring property has a rear access in that location here to the right. I'll show you a photo of that. This is the neighbouring property's courtyard. Here we can see the parking just in the corner of the shop there. In terms of residential amenity, there's no physical alterations as a result of this change. Any issues regarding boundary disputes or rights of way that are raised are legal matters which should be addressed between the interested parties and do not impact on the determination of this planning application. In terms of highway matters, the highways comments are detailed on page 97 of the agenda. Some additional information has been submitted as part of this application, which has been considered by the highway department. As you can see within the highway comments, they've stated that our parking standards are minimum standards, and there's no evidence of accidents within this location of the access. With the planning history, and it has a history of an unrestricted access as part of a dwelling as it was previously. The width of the access is wider than our minimum requirements for a shared access. The fact that not all the parking spaces will necessarily be used, and the resulting benefit of less vehicles parking on the public highway. So as a result of this change, the Highways Department have no objections to the parking of 4 vehicles as detailed in the revised plan. And in conclusion, our recommendation is to vary conditions 2 and 3 and to remove condition 6. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, David. We have 3 speakers. First is Mr. Smith, member of the public opposing the application. Just for the members of the committee, due to a significant medical condition to Mr. Smith's voice and throat, I have accepted that he will have slightly longer than the 3 minutes, so he doesn't have to rush or put strain on his throat. So, Mr. Smith, would you like to come forward? Thank you. Your time starts when you're ready. Just press the red button.
Good evening. My voice is not too bad at the moment. Yeah, thank you. I'm Colin. I live at number 17. If I just may start by giving you a little bit of history of the development. The first application went in May 2020. It's a very large house with 2 car parking spaces. Highways wanted to ensure that the cars entered and exited the site in forward gear. This was not possible when this application was withdrawn. The second application then went in August 2020. It was smaller than the first one. It had a turning point for 2 cars. Looking great, it was approved. Parish Council was happy, Highways was happy, and I was happy. During the build, after it was approved, I noticed it was not being built to the approved plans. I complained the enforcement officer and got the enforcement officer out. I could see that there was not enough room for a turning point, amongst other things. We then get to application 3, which ensured me that a turning point would be completed once it was approved. This was a statement by Jedwin Designs. The Parish Council also voiced concerns over the turning point. After a complaint from me referenced ASTO planning consultants, we then get to application 4. In this application, they then went to 4 car parking spaces with no turning facility. I could not believe what I'd seen. I endeavoured then to get this in front of the Planning and Licensing Committee. There was no turning point. They doubled the cars, and that means all these cars are just entering the site. This came to committee on August the 8th, 2023. It was discussed in depth by yourselves, and you could see my issues. I was very satisfied when you applied condition 6, which allowed only 2 cars to be on the site, and a barrier would have to be put up to ensure that this was enforced. Not 20 days later, did another application hit my mat where they wanted to remove condition 6, which was clearly applied for by yourselves. I'm here now saying that in 5 months since condition 6 was applied, nothing has changed. I've lived through this now, and we have constant movement of vehicles to get in and out. It creates lots of vehicle noise, and it's very dangerous. They reverse in when it's dark and raining, and it's not safe for my children. On one occasion, my daughter was nearly clipped by a wing mirror. It's a very narrow access, which I have access to for 2 vehicles. My neighbour has access for 1 vehicle, and they're now looking at putting in another 4. I'd like to conclude by saying, even though when you see that picture up there, 4 car parking spaces looks brilliant, they all sit there and they all sit there well. But what nobody sees around this table is how those cars are getting to those car parking spaces. What they're doing actually is reversing off a very, very big, busy junction near the Sun Inn and the access road to the village hall, which is heavily used daily. It's an accident waiting to happen. And I don't know why we've come back to committee today, because you all decided that condition 6 should be set in place to avoid the issues I have today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. If you can stay for 2 seconds. Any questions from the committee members? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Just for clarity, you use that entrance we can see behind the telegraph pole there to access the back of your property, is that right?
You're looking at number 19. To the right, it's number 17 where I live, and I have access in there for 2 vehicles, which I don't use all the time. I just use it when I want to either be in shopping or unload logs from my van. But I've got vehicle access for 2 cars, and number 17 has got access for 1 vehicle. The 4 cars you're looking at are at the back, and they're having to reverse down that track to get into that access. And it's just too much traffic. If you go back to the junction, if you don't mind. Yeah, that junction, that one there. That road up there is the Village Hall Road, that one. The other road is part of the highways near the Sun Inn, which everybody in the village calls the Sun Inn roundabout, because everybody that uses the chip shop or come from Greetham to the shop, they spin round in front of the sun. So it's heavily used all day long. What our developers are doing are they're driving up the Village Hall Road, and they're going to reverse gear and they reverse along that road which you're seeing now and reverse in and put their cars in. And 9 times out of 10, the first car that'll come in will get at the back, and another car will come in and reverse in, and within 10 minutes, the car at the back wants to get out. So then both vehicles leave, and this happens on a daily basis. These cars move in and out of this site. I'm not joking, 100 times a day. It's in, out, in, out. It's constant noise. It makes the dogs bark. And when my children try to walk around that back bit, they can't. It's dangerous. My mum, who's 88, a mobility scooter, she cannot come to my house now without going up the village hall and round the back to my back gate, which I've got another access. It's just totally wrong. You can see what they're doing reversing up that road. It's wrong.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Committee, any other further questions? If there's not, I'll thank you, Mr. Smith, and
Thank you very much.
ask the ward member, Councillor Samantha Harvey, to come forward.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing.
Councillor Harvey, as ward member, you're aware you have 5 minutes.
Yep.
Which starts as soon as you start speaking. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I've been asked to speak on behalf of the neighbours re this application and the removal of condition 6. The condition as detailed was requested by yourselves after lengthy debate in August, specifically to prevent the intensification of the site access and to prevent the potential conflict between vehicles reversing on and off site. Since that time, there has been no material change in conditions in the area. I shall not go over old ground, but would point out the following. The original cottage had parking for 1 car and a garage, thus 2 spaces. Under the approved plans 2020-0959, The parking was restricted to 2 cars and a turning area. This was the compromised agreement formed by Highways, Planning and the developers at the time. And at that time, June 2020, the Highways engineer stated, "It is important that the parking spaces are provided with adequate dimensioned and demonstrated to work in times of adequate manoeuvring in out of the site in a forward direction. Although the site is outlined in red, for clarity, the applicant should confirm on plans that they have access rights over the courtyard for entrance and for manoeuvring of vehicles. The service road drive allows access to the 3 cottages via the shared courtyard to the front of the property. There are covenants in place and there is already legal discourse between neighbours on this shared area. Of course, any neighbour and or land disputes do not form any part of the planning process. Currently, there are at least 3 vehicles that should use this shared access for other cottages. It's worth pointing out that the agreed access for number 17 through another party is actually only temporary agreement. And so therefore you should take into account that another 3 vehicles use this site and should use this site regularly. The Highways report also describes parking at the Sun Inn. The rear car park has had no public use for a number of years and so is no way a material fact and is a historic driveway anyway, so those comments should be discarded. The highway concern, focusing on the Community Hall Drive at the junction of the Lees, is still awaiting investigation. This was submitted in September 2021 prior to the build being completed and was down to a near miss. But due to the positioning and the way the vehicles are reversed along this service road into the property, it should be considered as it was by yourselves in August. The Parish Council also sees no sound planning reason to remove the condition. I would therefore ask the committee to retain condition 6. All parties are pleased that the alternative planting will go ahead and support the variance to condition 3. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Harvey, I was interested in what you said there about the 3 other vehicles, the access protected by covenants. Can you expand on that? Because obviously, you know, if there's 3 other vehicles there, where are they to park on that access at the moment without interfering with Mr. Smith's property?
I don't know whether it's helpful actually, Paul, to go back to where you see the backyards. Then that one. So as you can see where that gate is, that area there, that area, that's into 17. So that's where that should be parked. Now there's renovation works being done on number 17, and there was an agreement with basically the community centre that they would use the back entrance. That's been long standing, but actually is a temporary thing whilst work is done on this property. So they have 2 cars, and obviously the number 17 through the back here has also the parking. But as you can see, there's very restricted parking. So adding another 2 cars into this causes even more problems. So it's a very small area, and obviously these cottages are listed and were built long before we had cars on the road. So car parking and things, especially to this is the heart of the conservation area, and that green that you see in front of this property is the village green. So it's worth remembering this is a conservation area. It's the heart of the village, a village area that was kind of formed long before cars were invented and on the road, and so therefore parking is very restricted, unfortunately. Does that answer your question? Or
Yes, thank you. And if I may, supplementary there, the silver car we can see, again, just looking at the block plan there, is that car actually in front of the building there? It looks to be offset on the drawing here, i.e. it's not a straight running to reverse there. It may be the angle of that photograph is actually time to turn in and the front of that car's facing the neighbour's building.
it's my understanding that that is outside number 21, and yes, as you say, there's not a straight line in sight really. So yes, it makes reversing very tricky.
Thank you. Committee, any further questions? Councillor Smith.
The officers mentioned that by having 4 car spaces for 4 cars to park there, that would leave on 2 cars parking on the road. I wonder if you have any comment on that?
They are right in that it would prevent 2 cars parking on the road. I would point out that outside the Sun Inn, I don't know whether we have a picture, if we could take the wide angle, there is actually, don't know if we've got. Don't think we have, that's the widest view. So to the left here, for anyone just outside the Sun Inn pub, which is the white building, there's a kind of triangle that forms part of the circle, and there's parking spaces within that. So that I think there's up to 7 spaces, depending how well people park. There is up to 7 spaces in just that small area, and then there is on-road parking on the Leas as well. But again, like any of our villages, parking is at a premium, unfortunately, isn't it?
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? If not, thank you, councillor Samantha Harvey. I can ask now the agent, Duncan Clark. Thank you, Mr. Clark. You have 3 minutes from when you start speaking. Thank you.
Thank the committee for allowing me the opportunity to speak on behalf of the applicant in favour of the application. I'm a highway consultant with over 45 years of experience working in both the public and private sector. The site currently has a restriction in place that allows just 2 parking spaces. The reason given for the restriction was to avoid the intensification in use of the existing access and the potential further conflict between vehicles reversing onto or off the site. As a result, up to 2 vehicles which could easily and safely be parked on the site currently have to park within the public highway. The restriction imposed does not affect the number of car movements or parking demand generated by the dwelling. The restriction means that when there is demand for more than 2 car parking spaces, the additional demand has to be taking place within the public highway. It is our opinion that requiring up to 2 more cars to park within the highway is likely to cause more highway safety issues than by allowing them to park on the drive. Parking within the public highway can cause obstruction to the free flow of traffic and can also lead to obstruction to visibility space from road junction and private accesses. On-street car parking can cause safety issues for vulnerable road users such as cyclists and pedestrians. Rutland County Council's own parking standards are expressed as minimum standards with the aim to minimise the use of carriageways for parking. It is therefore clear that Rutland's car parking standards are designed to reduce the need to park within the public highway. Allowing the applicant to park 4 cars on a drive will minimise use of carriageways for parking, and therefore this proposal fully complies with Rutland's own parking standards. A turning facility is not required within this private drive to comply with current standards. Just because a dwelling has 4 spaces to park does not mean that all 4 spaces would be constantly in use. It could be that 1 or 2 of the spaces are only used infrequently but when visitors arrive. Therefore, I'm of the opinion that whilst it is likely that traffic movements would increase, they would not necessarily double. The reason given for the previous restriction was to avoid the intensification in use of the access. However, the access complies with highway standards for a shared private drive and has appropriate pedestrian and vehicle visibility displays. There is also a legal covenant in place stating that no parking or obstruction should take place over any part of the shared drive. Some photographs may have shown a white transit van parked on the shared driveway. This van belongs to the neighbours and is parked in contravention of the legal covenant. The applicant has advised me that a letter has been sent to the neighbours asking them to comply with the legal covenant and not to park on any part of the shared driveway. It is the case that the site access is better than a large number of private drives in the village, including those with direct access off Main Street, yet there is no history of any accidents as a result of those standard accesses. It is noted that following their review of our supporting highway report, the Highway Authority did accept the applicant had demonstrated that the access is adequate to accommodate the movements of all vehicles associated with the proposed 4 parking spaces and will be supported by the application. We are of the opinion that there could be no reasonable highway safety grounds to refuse this application and note the officer's recommendation is for approval. I would respectfully request that the committee approve the application in line with the officer's recommendation.
I didn't see who was first. We'll go Mr. Payne first. Councillor Payne.
How many cars are routinely parked in that space? You mentioned, you say they're not always 4. So how many are routinely parked?
My understanding is that they probably have 3 routinely parked, but not 4.
Thank you. Councillor McGraw.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I'm thinking about what seemed to me to be perhaps a contradiction in some of the evidence that you gave, suggesting that if the parking spaces on site are limited to 2, then inevitably there will be parking on the public highway, which potentially could be more dangerous than parking off the public highway. But then shortly after that, you suggested that it was unlikely that there would ever be 2 vehicles additional to the 2 that have currently approval. And so I wondered if you could see a contradiction between that, because you seem on the one hand to be claiming that if condition 6 is removed, this will push more vehicles onto the highway. But on the other hand, you seem to be saying that this won't happen very much. I wondered which of those was the real position here.
I don't think I said that, no. What I was saying was, when there is a demand for up to 4 cars to park, at the moment, in theory, 2 have to park on the public highway. But if you allowed 4 to be parked on the highway, then when there was the additional demand, all 4 could be accommodated on the site. So it's not a case that that you seem to be suggesting that I'm saying that there will be 4 all the time. I'm just saying when there is the need for 4, the 2 that would have to currently park in the highway would safely park off the highway.
Councillor
Thank you
West.
for that.
Councillor West.
Thanks, Chairman. Thank you. What's your view on the safety of reversing into that site?
My view is that reversing into that site is perfectly safe. Reversing into access takes place in and out of access all over the place. And in terms of this access is a far safer access to reverse into out of rather than ones on directly onto Main Street.
Thank you.
Any other further questions from the committee? In that case, thank you, Mr. Clark. We will now open up to debate. Councillor West, you have the right to go first as you are ward member.
Thanks, Chairman. As Councillor Harvey said, the parish council have suggested there's no reason to remove this condition 6, but I'd just like to open up the debate by asking the highways officers what their view is on reversing into this drive and what their take is on the safety of that and why we had that original requirement and why we dropped it.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, I wasn't in attendance at the previous committee. That was a colleague who's no longer at Rutland. So I'm not familiar with the debate or how it came about that there was a request for a maximum of 2 parking spaces. Consequent to that, there was obviously additional information submitted by the agent and the highways consultant. And it was based on that evidence and a site visit by myself that I, on behalf of the local highway authority, decided that, you know, it was acceptable for 4 parking spaces. In terms of reversing, so it's been commented about turning within the site that previous applications had turning. We can only require turning if the access goes onto a classified road, which it isn't. So we can't insist upon turning, even though perhaps somebody who previously worked for the local highway authority did insist upon it. In terms of reversing, as has been said, this happens all the time over, you know, lots of highways. And in fact, the local highway authority would recommend reversing into a parking area opposed to reversing out. So the fact that they are reversing down there, there's good visibility. It's street lit. Unfortunately, it doesn't have any other footpaths. So I'm sure pedestrians use various routes around that front and over the green. I mean, they do have the option of, you can just about see it there. There is a kind of a turning head, for want of a better word, where they could actually go in forward and reverse in from that point. So cutting down the length of reversing. So I'd personally recommend that the residents do that. two of the site visits I was on, though, there's been mention of a white van that's parked there. It was there on both occasions, so that would make it more difficult if the van was parked within that narrowing there. But yeah, in summary, basically reversing, it's not against highway code or anything to not reverse in there. There's a slightly better manoeuvre to do which would still involve reversing, but I don't see any highway safety issue with reversing. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, any questions, please? Councillor Payne.
I'm getting a little bit of deja vu here, Chair, because I can remember going through this and I thought we'd sorted this with condition 6. Because technically you can get 4 cars on that patch. But as it's been pointed out, if the car behind wants to move, then you're going to have to move at least one other car, if not 2, to let them out. Also, the point made about driving in and then turning in and reversing back. If my understanding of this site is correct, to do that, you'd actually have to go on somebody else's parking area. And if that area is occupied, then you can't do that manoeuvre at all. I look at this and think, yes, technically, as we discussed at length in August, this is there might be you get 4 cars on this site, but in reality, that's squeezing too much in. It's time pot. I think this is suitable for 2 cars, and I think condition 6, which we put on last time, was a perfectly sensible condition. I really don't see any need to reverse it.
Thank you. Can I just let the officer come back first, please, Karen?
Thank you, Chair. No, that is not a private, well, it could be owned by that property, but it's public highway up to the front boundary, so they're not going on to anybody else's land there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Payne.
Sorry, but I'm in support of the other Councillor Payne's comments. We seem to be having the same debate that we had in August. And I certainly supported the imposing of condition 6. And as far as I can see, nothing's changed in the meantime. So why would we change?
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Payne too. Councillor McRobb.
Yes, I'd like to ask, I guess, the highways officers what they think of the implication that 1 or 2 more vehicles parking on the public highway would increase the danger. I presume if they did, they would either be parking safely in an allocated parking space or legally by the side of the road where there is no parking restriction. And that if we as a highways authority thought that such parking was dangerous, I would have thought we would already have imposed restrictions.
So there's very few parking restrictions around there, and the on-street parking, other than the row that's in front of the pub that hasn't been in use for many years because it's got tables and chairs in front, that's an issue I'm taking up with the highway engineers to deal with licensing for the pub. So that's a separate issue. So the 7 parking spaces referred to in front of the pub, which is public highway, they've not been in use for a very long time. And then the white lined triangular area just to the left-hand side is very informal. There's no parking spaces marked out. So it would appear to be a bit of a free-for-all. Councillor Harvey informed me yesterday that during community events and football events, there are issues in the area, and there's all sorts of parking going on in areas that are not ideal at all. So there is a current issue there at certain times when there's certain events going on, apparently. I don't live in the village, so I've not observed it myself. So I'm only going on from what I've been informed. So in terms of at times, I think there are highway safety issues there with people parking in unsuitable locations on the public highway, yes. So the addition of the additional 2 parking spaces that would allow off-street parking would be beneficial, in my opinion. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think it does. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Andrew Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't here at the last meeting when this was discussed due to other commitments, but I'm struggling to see what's changed since condition 6 was imposed. And the logistics of 4 tandem parked cars, inevitably, the one at the back is the one that's going to be wanting to be used with 2 cars parked in front of it, meaning you've possibly got to move 3 cars to get one out. So I can't see why we need to change the condition at this stage.
Councillor Brown. Any other questions or comments? Councillor West.
Thanks. Paul, it's yours, wasn't it? Are those parking spaces big enough? We're happy with the size of the parking spaces. How many parking spaces does that property need to have for the number of rooms in that house? Because we have requirements, don't we, for a number of allowable parking spaces for size of house or number of rooms.
I can have a look online and have a look if there's detailed plans. Was it 2? But bear in mind they're minimum parking standards based on the habitable rooms. So anything above that, there's no maximum restriction.
Thanks. No, I was just wondering whether we've got ourselves in a pickle with needing 3 spaces and only providing 2. Okay, so we think we're only requiring 2. And the spaces are big enough for the minimum. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
I'd like to just echo what has been said already, in that I think parking for 4 cars in that area, it really is a bit tight. And I can see why the neighbour, number 17, would find it difficult at times with all the movement of cars and probably his own access. I understood from Councillor Harvey that there was suitable off-road parking further around to the west, wouldn't it, on that road there? So again, I struggle to see why we should remove condition 6. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Corby.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo a similar thing with the small villages. You know, this parking is a problem. I'm not sure that planning committee is the place every time for parking issues to be resolved. I think property there justifiably is 2 parking spaces. My concern would be that alternative parking arrangements might be made on the grassed area in the front, and it's a conservation area. Then you end up with our verges in a complete mess as well. Personally, I think we did the right thing in the last meeting with regards to condition 6. If there's only 3 people, then it would be better that the neighbours themselves could resolve this issue amicably between you. If there is alternative parking, sometimes we have to walk 10 or 20 yards to get to our property or whatever. That's the right thing to do. I think that's all I've got to say. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Corby. Do we have any further questions from the committee? If there's no further questions, the proposal in front of you is for approval. Is there anybody? Would anybody would like to propose that as a proposition? Okay. Councillor Payne.
I'd like to propose that if we go for approval, we go on the fact that condition 6 remains as part of the approval.
The application is for removal of condition 6.
I
so
beg your pardon.
So that doesn't quite work. Yes, sorry. So if there's no proposal, I would need a proposal, another proposal of the committee. Councillor Payne.
I propose that condition 6 remains.
Okay, can we please from the committee have reasons why? Because that is what the planners will require.
Due to inconvenience to the neighbours, due to the fact that for the same reasons that we discussed in August, basically, due to reversing in and out of the parking space. There are other spaces available on the highway, although the gentleman will have to walk to the car.
So just to
anymore.
be clear, it is on highway safety grounds and intensification of use and loss of amenity for the neighbour.
Loss of amenities, the main one, I think, yeah.
Come in on that
Yes,
point.
thank you.
Think, obviously, you've had the highway engineers' advice as experts about that, and they consider that the manoeuvring to be acceptable. However, I think if members are, as it sounds that you are, clearly wanting to refuse this, I think I from the debate that I heard, clearly the reversing and manoeuvring into and out of the site, I think that is a genuine one. I think there was a point that I don't think Councillor Payne picked up on, which I thought was relevant potentially to this, which was the issue about the tandem parking and the increased movements of vehicles to allow one in and out, which I think is reasonable. What I don't think I could justifiably defend it at an appeal would be the argument about impact on the neighbour's amenity. I don't think that's something that I could reasonably articulate and defend. I think if members are going to refuse it, I would stick to the concerns around reversing in and out of the site, the impact, the additional movements due to the tandem parking, and the fact that there are other on-street parking spaces available in close proximity.
Thank you, Justin. Councillor Payne, are you happy with that as a proposition?
I'm happy with that, thank you, Chair.
Would you have a seconder for that? Councillor Payne, one. If the new proposition then is for refusal of condition 6 to be removed on the basis of just been agreed with the planning officers, all those in favour of that proposition? And those against?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. We now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 5A 0397 FUL, land at Hawkswell House, Chickencote Road, Exton. Proposed of a single dwelling and attached annex, pool pavilion, natural swimming pool, adjacent landscaping, and form a new access. Okay, thank you. While members of the public leave, and we just need to switch over to the officer online who is dialing in due to a issue with a back injury.
Darren, you should be able to share your screen, Darren.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Darren, thank you.
Do you want to use your presentation slides?
I thought we were using Justin's.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Sorry, just to therefore to carry on, the recommendation is for approval, subject to conditions. Darren, if you'd like to present your report, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is the location of the site. It's adjacent to Hawkswell House with access from Chickencote Lane. It's approximately 700 metres northwest of Exton. Next. This is a closer view of the site with the Hawkswell House clearly seen fronting Exton Road, the farm towards the rear, and woodland on the east and boundary, and on the opposite side of Chickencote Road
even though Google Maps seem to have called it Exton Road. Next. This is a view eastwards along Tickencote Road from the vehicle access at Hawkswell House. Next. This is a view northwest towards Exton on the opposite side of Tickencote Road. As you can see, there's very little of the village seen in the distance. This one you can see a little bit more, but obviously this is winter time when there's very little vegetation on hedgerows and trees. This is a view from the western side boundary, northwest towards Exton, from higher up toward the rear of the site. Next. The view west towards Hawkswell House. Next. The view eastwards towards the application site, which is beyond that timber fence that you can see. The eastern boundary of the site is formed by those trees in the rear of the ground. This is looking west from the western corner of the site. Next. Those are the buildings at Highmore Farm to the southwest. Next. This is a view from within the site showing the south and the eastern boundary. The trees are the eastern boundary and the timber fence being the southern boundary. Next. This is another picture showing the rear boundary looking east. The view of the eastern boundary with the mature copse of trees. Next. This is a view from the western side boundary towards the northern boundary fronting Tickencote Road. Next. This is approximately the location of the new vehicle access from Tickencote Road. This is a view along Tickencote Road. The application site's on your left-hand side. Next. This is a view along Tickencote Road from the Tickencote Road from the junction with the Exton Road. Next. This is just up from the junction and shows the original access that was originally proposed to serve the dwelling, which during investigations resulted in a change to be relocated from Tickencote Road. Next. This is a view south along Exton Road. Next. This view shows the site from Exton Road and the southeastern corner of the site. Next. This is a view along the eastern boundary of the site from Exton Road. Next. This is a further view from Exton Road looking north. Only the trees in the eastern boundary can be seen. Next. This plan shows the location plan outlined in red of the site. This is a further plan showing the application site in relation to, and you can see Hawkswell House and the farmstead to the rear. This is a plan showing the original master plan for the development. Next. This shows what within the red line would form the residential curtilage of the new property, i.e. the garden area, with all the land outside being private amenity land and would be landscaped where additional landscaping is required. Next. This is a drawing showing floor plans. Next. This is the lower ground floor plan. Next. Ground floor plan. Next. First floor plan. This shows the proposed east elevation of the dwelling, and to the rear, the separate pool house. Next. Shows the southern elevation of the dwelling. Next. Shows the western elevation. Next. This is the northern elevation, which shows the dwelling and annex. Next. This drawing shows the elevation details of the pool house. This is a section of the development across the site. Next. These two images again show two sections with obviously the sections in the top, the locations of the section in the top left-hand corner. Next. This shows another two sections of the dwelling and its curtilage landscaping area, pool house. This is a visual of the annex garden and pond. Next. This visual shows the meadow garden, which will form part of the landscaping scheme. Next. This is a visual of the rear garden area in context with the dwelling and pool house. Next. These next images show montages of aerial views and views from Tickencote Lane for set periods of time to show what the development's likely to be like in context with the vegetation growth after different time periods. The first one here is after 1 year of tree growth. Next. This is from Tickencote Lane, 1 year. Next. This is after 5 years. Next. And again after 5 years. It shows the anticipated impact of the planting scheme after 10 years. And again from Tickencote Lane after 10 years, and this after 25 years. Tree growth in 25 years, again from Tickencote Lane. The main issues are whether the proposed development would comply with paragraph E, National Planning Policy Framework. The development proposed complies with the policies within the adopted development plan. Whether the proposed development would have an adverse effect on the setting of heritage assets, which obviously include Exton Conservation Area, listed buildings within Exton, Exton Park, Grade 2 listed registered park and garden. And would the proposed development have an adverse impact on existing residential amenities from nearby properties? This is a list of policies which are contained within the report. Next. Next. It's considered that there's no harmful impact to the amenities of neighbouring properties. There's no objection from the Highway Authority. The access is on a relatively straight section of road and adequate visibility is achievable. Conditions are proposed. The Conservation Officer, in relation to heritage issues, has confirmed that the proposal will not have a negative impact on the character and appearance of the Exton Conservation Area, setting of listed buildings and/or Exton Park. Next. Landscape visual impact assessment that's been undertaken. Results show that there'd be no significant adverse impacts on the character and appearance of the area. The design officer has no objection, concluding that the proposed scheme looks to have addressed all the issues raised by the design review panel. There's no objections subject to conditions requiring further on-site investigation should planning permission be granted from the county archaeologist. Next. Drainage, there's no objection from the lead local flood authority. Environmental protection, confirmed no objection subject to conditions concerning foul water drainage and maintenance. Existing trees and hedgerows along the front and eastern boundary will be protected during construction and will form an integrated part of the landscaping plan. With regards to sustainability, a number of measures are proposed and specific conditions are recommended to ensure that those are adopted and into the scheme that's before you tonight. With regards to ecology, there's no objection. Conditions are recommended requiring a landscape ecological management plan and mixed species hedgerows around the site's perimeter. Those last two we've already discussed, so next. So in conclusion, the planning application is supported by Design Midlands, which is an independent impartial resource providing design support. As such, Chapter 5, Paragraph 8E and Chapter 12, Paragraphs 130 and 134 of the MPPF are relevant. The Design Midlands Review Panel has assessed the overall ambition of the sustainable house in this location as commendable. The design officer has no objection and confirmed that the proposal meets the requirements of Paragraph 8E dwelling. The design and location of the proposed development is considered to respect and adequately address the impacts that the development would have on the surrounding landscape. As a result, it's considered that the proposal will comply with Paragraph 8E, 130 and 134 of the MPPF. Next. Although the proposal does not comply with policies CO3, CO4 and SP6 due to being located outside the plan limits for Exton and not being a dwelling proposed to meet an essential need as identified in policy SP6, the development is considered for the reasons identified in the response from Design Midlands and the design officer to be acceptable as it meets the requirements for a dwelling set out in MPPF paragraph 8E. The proposed development would not be visually intrusive or impact adversely on the form and character of the area or the amenities of nearby properties. Taking the above account, it's considered that the proposal is acceptable and complies with the MPPF sections 5, 9, 12 and 15 and policies CS1, CS19, CS20, 21 of the core strategy and policies SP1, 15, 19 and 23 of the site allocation, policies development plan and the adopted supplementary planning document. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren. Before I switch to speakers, it is critical that members have read their papers and got a full understanding of what paragraph 80E, etc. involves. So if you have not read your papers, please refrain from taking part in the debate because it is absolutely critical that you understand what that entails. Thank you. Can I call up our first speaker, Mr. Tommy Cooper, member of Exton and Horn Parish Council. Mr. Cooper, you have 3 minutes from when you start speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I represent the Parish Council of Exton and Horn as Chair. We have already raised written objections to this proposal. The Planning Officer's executive summary states this proposed development would not have an adverse impact on the character and appearance of Exton Conservation Area and or distant listed buildings, the character of the surrounding landscape and or the immediate amenities of adjacent residents. The PC strongly disagrees with the statement as they and the majority of the population of the village think it will have an adverse impact. Paragraph 80E of the MPPF states that to qualify for such development outside the village envelope and in open countryside, the design is to be of exceptional quality. is truly outstanding, reflecting the highest standards of architecture and would significantly enhance its immediate setting and be sensitive to the defining characteristics of the local area. Parish Council do not believe this proposed house satisfies any of these criteria and does not constitute an example of exceptional quality and outstanding design. Para 134 of the revised framework advises that outstanding or innovative designs which promote high levels of sustainability may be given sufficient weight, so long as they fit in with the overall form and layout of the surroundings. In the view of the Parish Council, this is clearly not the case. The site is an open countryside. The site is visible from the playground, the school playing fields, and most of the eastern part of the village. Thus, the design and material palette will be totally incongruous with the dominant and vernacular buildings within the village environs. This proposal is out of place and out of character for a rural village such as Exton, and the Parish Council believe it is ugly and looks like a pillbox. We urge the Planning Committee to refuse it. Thank you.
Councillor McRobb.
Yes, thank you. As a representative of the Parish Council, I've obviously heard what you've just said about the design. I'd like to ask for your response to something in the report in which I read key elements influencing the design concept were the circular forms, turrets, belvederes, large feature windows, and use of local stone found in the hall, its dovecote and gatehouse, and a folly called Henry's Fort, each forming to varying extents landmarks within the Exton estate. I'd certainly agree 100% that these are landmarks within the Exton estate. I'd like to hear your response to the statement that those are the key elements that influenced the design concept in this proposal.
Not entirely sure what your question is. Can you make it more succinct?
But let me try and clarify. I'm asking you because you are familiar with the local area, the local architecture.
Right.
And the proposal in front of us, we are told that the design concept of the proposed building has been influenced by the circular forms of various features of buildings within the Exton estate. I'm asking for your response to that.
Well, I don't think that's true. I mean, the only building you mentioned, Fort Henry, that has got castellations and turrets, but it's not circular. And I wouldn't say there are any circular buildings on the Exton estate, not that I know every single one.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry if that's not helpful.
No, I was asking for your view. That is helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Cooper, you did mention right at the start of your speech about the adverse impact that this would have as perceived by the Parish Council and the villagers. I just wondered if you could expand on that a little bit as to what the adverse impact is by the villagers and the Parish Council.
The view from the playing field and the school will look, you saw the montage of the northern section of it. It is very very dominant and circular, and it's not it's completely out of keeping with any other building in the village. And therefore, those people who live there and look at it, came from the school, will see this large stone thing at Hawkswell, and I think that will have an adverse impact on the people who live there, on the people who go to school there.
So,
the visual one, it's the view.
So, just because they'll look at it and won't like it, is that what you're saying?
They what?
They'll see it and they'll think, how awful.
Correct.
Right, okay,
That's
thank
exactly,
you.
that's exactly right.
Any other questions? In that, yes, very last minute, Councillor West and then Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Chairman. Sorry, just a quick one. I've not read the Exton Parish Council's minutes. Was this discussed at Parish Council meeting? What was the feel of the room then and the vote and who voted?
Everyone's against it. I mean, it was discussed some time ago because it came to us, gosh, I don't know, 6 to 9 months ago or something.
Okay.
No, the overwhelming feel is against it.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Would you agree that the position of this proposed site is in an isolated position? it is 700 metres, I gather, from Exton itself.
Yes, it is in an isolated position. You're quite right. It's in open countryside.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is the ward member, Councillor Heckles. You'd like to come forward? You have 5 minutes when you start speaking. Already on.
Good evening. Exton Parish Council have a number of significant concerns relating to this application. The proposed development is outside the plan limits to development. There is no essential need for it to be there. The proposed development is in the open countryside and sets a very bad precedent for building in the open countryside. The site is not included in Rutland's recent call for sites or the local plan, which is prioritising development in specified locations. Paragraph 80 of the National Planning Policy Framework states that planning policies and decisions should avoid the development of isolated homes in countryside, unless one of or more criteria are fulfilled. The exceptional quality of the design is contentious. The design statement suggests a similarity of the proposed building and a dovecot. However, a dovecot tends to be of limited visual impact. This proposed building is a 3-storey that would be highly visible from the playground, the school, Camden Close, Garden Road and Empingham Road. Even after 25 years, the tree planting will afford little screening. The design is aesthetically inappropriate to its suggested surroundings. Exton is a conservation village. More importantly, Exton Parish are very surprised that this application is even presented to the planning committee in such an incomplete condition. No conditions of the construction materials have been submitted with the application, other than a statement suggesting a fabric-first sustainable policy, along with the material palette indicating a local buff stone and natural timber. Whilst the biodiversity and sustainability in theory are to be applauded, there has been no carbon footprint of the actual build as materials are not clearly stated. So there is no declaration of the embodied carbon, which should be a fundamental part of the potential building as an ecological sustainable building. Many materials that could be used for its construction are anything but ecologically sound. For example, are they using any cement in the construction? Cement production alone generates 2.5 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide per year. This is around 8% of the total global CO2. Indeed, one newspaper has described concrete as the most destructive material on Earth. The driveway is resin bound. However, the aggregate stones used in the construction are typically sourced from mining and then crushed to form small gravel-sized pieces. Mining is a huge source of pollution and environmental destruction. The materials to be used for construction form an absolutely fundamental part of the planning permission. The production of many of these materials negate any potential environmental gain from a net zero property. It should be a requirement that the full carbon footprint of the bill be established and the property prove its ecological credentials prior to planning consent. The biodiversity net gain is indeed worthless without the carbon footprint. I would expect there to have been a BREEAM new construction certification or assessment in place before planning permission was granted. If the project is so special of its exemplary quality and sustainability, this needs to be confirmed with a certification. Sorry. Again, in an email on 24th of November 23, the Pollution Control Officer states, the information included in the planning application is insufficient and does not demonstrate that proposed management of foul drainage is appropriate. On a practical point, access will be a major consideration and there is no construction management plan. The roads are narrow with 7.5 tonne weight limits. There has also been at least one accident that I'm aware of in that junction with the Empingham Road, and it's a fast 60-mile-an-hour road. There is also flooding by Highmoor Farm, Hawkswell, and is permanently flooded with forcing people into the middle of the road. There has been one letter of support for the proposal. However, I would like to point out this is from a work colleague of the applicant who lives, and the person is living in Whissendine. whereas the parish council, they have had many complaints. In conclusion, if it's the biodiversity and ecological sustainability that makes this a special building, then there isn't enough information to confirm this. Despite its apparent environmental credentials, at what point, looking at the embedded bodied carbons, does this building reach net zero? It could be 10 years, 20, without clarification, no one knows. There should be a transparent BREEAM new construction certification in place. A small point, there's actually a misleading information on the planning portal. There is a review dated 23rd of the 11th, 23. However, this is actually a design review, 23rd of the 11th, 22. This is slightly misleading to the public. Exton Parish Council asked that the planning committee to take these points into consideration as you conclude whether or not to approve the planning application in its current form.
Thank you. Committee, open to questions. I just have one to start with. You talk about building materials and construction, etc. Surely that can all be covered in conditions.
I think it should be covered prior to going to planning
But
condition.
it's not a reason that for refusal, because it can be covered in conditions.
I personally think that it has to be part of the planning application process.
Which conditions would be? Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Heckles, you mentioned about the traffic management plan and the 7.5 ton weight limit on those roads. Am I right in thinking it's 7.5 tons except for access?
I believe it is, although down at Horn Mill, there's a little bridge and I'm not aware from highways whether heavy lorries loaded could actually pass over the top. I know it's incredibly narrow. There's a give-way point coming down the hill, but it's actually very hard to see if there are cyclists and other vehicles coming through and it's single track.
Okay, thank you.
Our final speaker, please. Can I ask Jonathan Hendry, agent, please, to come and speak on this application? Thank you.
Evening, Chair, evening, members. Really here to answer any questions that you've got, but I think I'd just like to clarify a few points before we go to the question, which is there's been 4 objections from people in Exton Village. It's not been overwhelming support. They're on the planning tracker for everyone to see. There's been a letter of support, and that is not from anyone that we know or the clients I'm familiar with. And just to clarify, paragraph 80, the issue around whether this is in the boundary or outside, it has to be outside the boundary. Policy is there, it has to be in open countryside and therefore isolated. This is the first thing that we tested when we started discussing this with the planning department. And that was the first thing that we had to establish. So we couldn't establish that, then we couldn't move the project on to its next stage. Obviously, the design of this design is very subjective, and I think it's important just to clarify that we've been to 2 design review panels, independent panels, who have stated that this meets the criteria of exceptional, and therefore meets the criteria of paragraph 80. I think that's really important to clarify. And the materials are stated. I mean, we're proposing to build this out of an Ancaster stone. It's cut stone for the main building, and then it's a rubble stone at the base, almost like it's in its natural state in the ground. And this has been sourced from Tritcham Quarry. This is the most local quarry. So the idea is that the building will be built from materials from its locality. There is no cement bonding this together. It's a building that's made of stone, oak and lime. The building will be carbon neutral and it'll be an A-rated building. And it'll be capable of being off-grid, although there will be mains electric and a mains water connection. Foul drainage, that will be dealt with via its own independent biotank. So this is not going to impact on local drainage systems or increase load capacity on the local system. And just to clarify a point that was made a while ago, this is not in a flood zone. There is a flood zone in the bottom of the valley next to the old treatment works, the sewage treatment works, and where the brook runs through the bottom. That's actually a flood zone in the bottom of. This is outside the flood zone. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, any questions, please? Sorry, Councillor West.
Thanks, Chair. We're a bit stuck out the limb over here. Thank you, Mr. Hendry. How will it be off-grid? That is a substantial house with presumably a substantial need for power.
Yeah.
You know, I run a business with solar installation and small wind generation, and I know how much I can provide for our needs. How are the off-grid, what off-grid provision is there?
So in terms of generating power for the house, every roof, apart from the first floor roof at the front, which is a terrace, will have photovoltaic panels on there, including the pool house, and there's a small area at the back of the site that's screened, which will also have photovoltaic panels. And that will generate around 25 kilowatt of electricity. This will then be stored in battery backups. So we'll use battery Tesla packs. The issue with PVs is that you kind of store it in the day when you're not generally around. And then when you're around in the evening, it's not there. So that will be stored in battery backups. Rainwater will be collected from the roofs in a tank, and this will be used for the house and also be used for irrigation of the garden. Going back to the kind of materials and the idea that fabric first, that's where we start, because obviously technology moves on and can be changed, and it will be changed as, you know, houses develop. That will be a case for all of us. So, you know, we've sourced stone from a local quarry. The idea is that we use local timbers. Everything is natural in this building. We'll use sheep's wool insulation. The walls will be over 400 millimeters thick. So kind of got 200 mil of sheep's wool, 150 mil of stone. And then inside, instead of using concrete blocks, we'll use a clay block. And this again reduces carbon footprints and helps with kind of the whole idea of embodied carbon as well. There is also, just to say on the landscape, there is a biodiversity net gain of habitat and woodland of 65% and 95% for hedgerows. So we'll be massively improving that piece of landscape in terms of habitat.
Councillor Corby.
Yeah, I really have just one question with regard to the archaeological aspect. I think that when I went through everything, that was one query and one problem that probably just needed addressing. Anything further from that to report?
Yeah, so we did a technical study of the site that showed that there was very little on the site, and there were some concerns raised by the local authority archaeologists, which our archaeologists made a response to. That's live on the tracker. And I think it's fair to say once the local authority archaeologists reconsidered the information that was presented to them, they were happy to put some conditions in for some trial trenching. So it would be a pre-commencement condition.
Thank you. Just one question from me about the look of the building. It's mentioned in the report about it taking influence from those, as Councillor Robb said, about the structures in Exton Park and on the estate. Can you just give me some indication of what of those structures are? Because having got him married there, I can't remember many circular.
Yeah, so in our design statement, there's a map that sets out that kind of piece of landscape and pinpoints the location of these buildings. Most of them are still there, some of them aren't there anymore. I suppose we started by the dovecot that sits in the park. That kind of drew our attention initially. And the idea of a building being a folly in a landscape, that a building can be there to be seen. This is not about hiding a building. You know, the issue is about looking across the landscape and seeing this. You know, all great country houses have a vista to them. And this is the whole policy is about creating a country house for the 21st century, so that in 100 years' time, we can look back and say, this is what we did then, like we do with the Georgians, like we do with the Edwardians, like we do with the Gothic movement. Those things are there. The National Trust, you know, operate these things. So it's kind of folly-like building. So we started by thinking about making a cylindrical form. There's something interesting in making it cylindrical as a house, which felt like it was going to be unique to start with in plan form. And then thinking about where we make connections to the landscape. So I don't know if you've noticed, there are two kind of morph parts to that cylindrical form, which we call a 21st century bay. It's almost like pulling the skin of the building and extruding it, which creates this huge piece of glass, which is in a way a new bay window to the house. You know, we were interested in Exton Hall on the front has these big bay windows. So it was a kind of an analogy or a reference to the bay, if you like. And then, you know, the idea that it's a slope site. So we wanted to think about how we could, you know, to reduce vertical impact on the landscape, how we could kind of nestle this into the ground and into the site. And that's not only done with cutting the building into the natural slope at what we call kind of lower ground level, which becomes an entrance to the building, but also about how we use landscape to do that as well. I mean, initially we had some tree-lined vistas that came from the bays that would be like, you know, your tree-lined avenue as you approach the house that kind of set up and framed a view in the landscape. And one of the comments we got back from the design review panel was that actually maybe that it could be more natural once we get beyond the kind of the formal garden around the pool and the back of the house. So that was adjusted. But also, you know, this is not just Exton. You know, we did a whole historical study, and historically there was 200 dovecots in the landscape in Rutland. So historically, it was a familiar form and a familiar site that you would have seen across the landscape. So in a way, you know, something interesting about putting something back that kind of traces those kind of historical connections.
Thank you. Richie, any further questions? In that case, thank you, Mr. Henry.
Thank you.
Hans, you can turn the microphone. Thank you. Committee, open to debate. Questions, please. Hans.
So from my own experience, obviously I know how hard it is to get such a planning application through planning. And I understand that they've obviously done a lot of the groundwork. I just want to know that to get to this point, how much importance is it the opinion of the impact of the people compared to the impact? Obviously, this has been chosen to be approved because of its zero carbon impact and how it applies with the part on how it impacts on the how should I say it. I just don't how does the planning officer weigh up the impact on the village of Exton compared to the impact on the general area?
Chairman, through you. I think with applications for paragraph 80 dwellings, there is a high threshold, as has been said, that needs to be met. In this instance, we encouraged the applicants to go through a paid-for pre-application process. That included an initial design review panel being set up by through our urban designer, and got independent experts in through Design Midlands. So Design Midlands pulls together experts in terms of a number of areas. In this particular case, I think it related to heritage, landscaping, design and highways, I think were the key core group of experts that were there. They had a look at this. They had a look at the scheme that was initially put forward by the applicants. I think it was fair to say at that point whilst they were supportive to some extent of the principle at that time, they had some concerns about the evidence and the justification that had been put forward by the applicants. So we had that discussion with the applicants. They went away, took on board the comments of the design review panel and submitted the application. There was a further review, a second review by the design review panel. And they went through it and felt that the scheme had addressed the majority of their concerns. There were some that were still outstanding. The applicants then took those points on board. Further revisions were made to the scheme, and there was some further consultation with the urban designer, and effectively it got to a point where we were satisfied that the application does meet the very high bar for them. We've had, I think, a number of applications for paragraph 80s in Rutland already. And there is this issue that, yes, they have to be in the countryside. They are there to be effectively the new estate home, effectively. They're a feature on there, and there's different approaches that are taken to them. Some are hidden away, some are there and sit proud. In this particular case, you know, it is not a design that has been designed to hide the building. It is set within a hill slope, so it is, I think, from the northern side that you see it. The other side is quite well screened because it's set into this bank. It rises up the land here. So from views from here, it's quite well hidden by the landscape, and you can see it's been cut into the slope. There's also a significant amount of landscaping that's done. You saw from this is the picture from year one, that there's been a significant amount of consideration given to the landscaping for the scheme as well. So whereas it is effectively grass paddock at the moment, there's been significant additional tree planting and meadow planting, etc., which will make a significant change to the character of that area, and as has already been said, significantly improve the biodiversity net gain of the fields and the site. So overall, there's been a lot of consideration given to the design and the approach. Design is subjective, and the NPPF is quite clear that as planning officers, we shouldn't impose our own views on what we consider to be good design. It's a question of, is the design acceptable, and has it taken into account the key features of the landscape? The architect has set out quite clearly the thought process behind how they've come up with that scheme and how they've tried to address the impact on the landscape. And as officers, we're satisfied that it does meet the high test that's required.
Thank you. Councillor West, did you have your hand up apparently?
Thanks, Chairman. Members, we had an application under ATE 3.5 years ago, 4 years ago in Morcott, and we had a heated discussion in here, a recommendation for approval. We had a heated discussion in here, and we went against officers' recommendations, and we refused it. That was later approved on appeal. I'm pleased to say it was approved on appeal because it was a lovely place, and it did embody that grand designs kind of idea of something which, as a local authority, we can be proud of when it is built. So that's the kind of thing that we need to bear in mind, and we need to be thinking about, you know, what are we getting here? I'm not sure, Justin, that this is necessarily an estate house because it's sitting on 2 acres, not 2,000, and it's not got capability Brown's landscape grounds around it. But I mean, I like this. I think this looks nice. If we're going to get something architecturally outstanding, it is going to be a bit off the wall. It's not going to be a traditional house that fits in with the local vernacular in a traditional way. It's going to have to fit in different ways and draw on other aspects of our local design and how things have been built in this county. I'm not sure I can see a dovecot there, with all credit to the architect, but for me, I think that is architecturally outstanding, to try groom the architect's ego a little. And I think it's well placed in in the landscape there, and, you know, I like it.
Yes, just
Sorry, Chairman, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points that were raised earlier, just around conditions and things like that. There are obviously conditions relating to the design and the approved plans, but there is also condition 3 that requires the finalising of the materials to be submitted. But obviously, we would expect what is shown on the plans and what the architect has spoken around today. But there is a condition to require that. There was, I think, also concerns around construction management plan as well. I think there is a condition, I think it's condition 15 in the agenda that relates to construction management plan and all the obviously vehicle routing, etc., that's required from that. And then there is an additional condition in the addendum paper, which just picks up on the precise detail of the residential curtilage. And the reason for that is that we don't want at any future point any sort of domestic paraphernalia being built within the sort of meadow landscape that we're doing. So the actual domestic curtilage is quite tight to the building, and the areas that you can see predominantly in the foreground and around here, this would all effectively sit outside of the domestic curtilage with the exception of the driveway, so that we maintain that sort of rural and countryside feel to the site.
Thank you, Justin. So there was a number of hands up. I can't remember which order, so I'm just going to go from top to bottom. So Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, this application depends upon whether it does agree with the NPPF 80E. It established that it is isolated, it's in a rural area. And is it an exceptional work of architecture? I agree, I think it is. I don't think we have enough innovative design within Rutland. Most of the houses I see that get built in villages all follow the same pattern, a stone facing and traditional roof and all the rest of it. There doesn't seem to be much in the way of having innovative design. I think this is an opportunity in this isolated place to have such an innovative design. It also has advantages of a lot of environmental features, water collection, solar power, etc. And yes, landscaping would appear to be exceptional. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown and Councillor McRobb. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As nice as Rutland is in its current form, we can't see it being pickled in aspic. And if people weren't brave enough to build some of the buildings hundreds of years ago that people think are so lovely now, then we wouldn't have them. But I mean, this whole thing revolving around paragraph 80E, exceptional design, truly outstanding. Well, this is certainly going to stand out. Significantly enhance the immediate setting and be sensitive to the defining characteristics of the local area. Well, that is completely subjective, isn't it? And para 34 is on a similar form, so long as it fits in with the overall form and layout of their surroundings. Again, it's subjective. And as Councillor West said, we have had these before. I think there was even one in Uppingham a few years ago. But the one, the significant ones I can remember are the one in Whitwell, which was a former councillor, which had a lot of objections from the village and was granted on appeal, as was the one in Moorcock, which I think was a similar sort of, not quite the same as this, but it was similar sort of design to this, which again was approved on appeal. So we've got to be very careful to look at this and think very carefully about it before we make our decision, bearing that in mind.
Thank you, Councillor McGraw.
I think I might be part of a growing cascade of agreement on this particular application. I felt very conflicted when I first looked at it, because if you read through the details of the construction materials, the carbon footprint details, the biodiversity and landscaping, I think on those grounds alone, it's a really exciting development. And if you ignore the architectural features, it's the kind of thing that we absolutely should be encouraging as far as possible, and not only in grand buildings like this one, but in the more common scale. My first reaction to the design when I looked at it was, I could see that on the south bank of the Thames without any difficulty whatever. And I couldn't quite figure out how it would sit in the Rutland landscape. But the more I've looked at it and the more I've thought about it, in the context of the history of architecture in Rutland, there's another building which I'm very familiar with because I pass it frequently, which is the new mansion on the Hambleton Peninsula, which is designed rather like an Elizabethan mansion or something of the period between then and now. It's a new building. It's clearly designed to be a mansion of the future, part of our heritage, and yet it only looks back. Whereas this building, I think, does look forward, and it adds to the diversity of architecture in what might otherwise become a rather stale environment visually. So my current feeling is, I think I'm in support of it for all the reasons that have been presented.
Thank you. Did Councillor Wilby come on as well?
Yeah.
Sorry, Councillor Wilby, you missed the start of this, so you can't be involved in this discussion, unfortunately. No, your apologies were given, but just legally you can't comment on this because you missed the start of the debate. Councillor Payne.
I'll keep it brief. I've written down here, design is subjective. So whether I like this or not isn't really what I'm being asked to discuss. I think I take the points that Councillor McRobb made about the methods of construction, the water, off-grid electricity. Those are the factors that I'm being influenced by. I'm probably in the minority here. I'm not being influenced by the design.
Thank you. Councillor McRobb, part two.
If I can speak again, this will be a lot briefer. I only wanted to say that because of my initial reaction, I think I understand the objections from people who believe that it would be an eyesore on the landscape. But I think given more time to become familiar with it, which may in the context of mansions be 25 years or 50 years, I think it will probably look like quite a natural part of the landscape.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions? Councillor West.
Thank you, Chairman. You just indulge me, sorry. This is not something we can put in as a condition, but it's something that I might put out there for the applicant and the site owner to think about, which is that Exton Hall, which was built, I don't know, 300 years ago, or whatever, to be wonderful then, now has throws its gardens open several times a year for members of the public under the National Open Gardens Scheme. I wonder whether this is the sort of thing that the applicant might consider for somewhere like this, so that people who do live in the area might have the opportunity to come and have a look around once a year, enjoy the gardens, enjoy the vista, try to appreciate the place, and grow to love it, perhaps.
Thank you.
So that's
Lovely sentiment, not a planning principle that I'm aware of. But I'm sure you'll get an invite. Thank you. So if there's no more questions, we now move to the recommendation to approve. Please cast proposer. Councillor West, the seconder, Councillor McRobb. All those in favour? And those who abstained? 2.
So that's 9 for 1 abstention, and Councillor Wilby, unfortunately, I can't count your vote. So that's equals 10. That's correct. That's carried.
Thank you. We now move on to item 5B 0271. Res Mulberry Homes, land to the south of Stapleford Road, Whissendine. Application reserved matters consent for the erection of 66 dwellings for layout, scale, landscape appearance and access. Others are already approved as part of the outline planning position. pursuant to outline planning permission 126 OUT. Recommendation is for approval, and just for clarity, we referred this previously and we are discussing the spatial layout and the biodiversity of the application, not the principle in general. Mr. Thrower.
Thank you, Chairman. As you noted, this application was deferred from committee in September to seek changes regarding the density of the housing proposed within the specific location and issues around biodiversity again. I would draw members' attention to this evening's addendum report. There are some discussion of matters in relation to the application on there. And I must also apologise, there was an incorrect plan attached to the main report, the layout plan at the end. That was the original plan. I will show you the revised layout as part of the presentation. And if needed, I can go through specific changes as to what actually the differences are between the two. The application is for the construction of 66 new dwellings on site, following the granting of outline consent for that number, or up to that number, shall I say, in 2022. The application site is located to the geographical northwest of the settlement of Whissendine, and access is provided, which was approved under the outline application. Access is to be provided from Stapleford Road to the north. The site adjoins Harbour Close and a number of other roads to its eastern boundary, although no vehicular access is proposed to the site from that direction. As you can see from the aerial photograph, this is the application site here, as I said, to the northwest of the main body of the village. Taking a look at the revised site layout then, the main changes in relation to the previously considered layout relate to this southern end of the site. Members may remember that there were two plots located at the very southern end of the site, separated by provision for the public right-of-way or a path linking Harbour Close to a public right-of-way along the western boundary. Those two plots have been removed from this section and incorporated, one within here and one within here. So the north central block and the southern block. The proposal now shows a revised route to the public right-of-way along a path here, then following the estate road to the point where it connects with the western boundary. Members will note from the addendum report that the public rights-of-way officer doesn't support that in terms of there being a slight negative impact on the public right-of-way. However, obviously in an effort to accord with the considerations of members in terms of reducing the density in this area and sort of opening up that southern end, they've had to reroute that public right-of-way in some fashion. What I would recommend in terms of this, therefore, this evening is members may wish to consider whether or not they are content with that as an alternative route for the public right-of-way, or whether they wanted to indicate an alternative, potentially taking the public right-of-way from its connection point here at Harbour Close down to the western boundary, then either routing it up along an existing or proposed mown path along the western boundary, which would allow the public right-of-way to retain, to be, the route outside the site to remain the same. Alternatively, you could consider whether or not you wish to see the public right-of-way just take a direct route across, and for this section here to also be diverted to take a more direct route along here. Obviously, in terms of consideration of diversions for public rights-of-way, that is the responsibility of this committee. And so in terms of considering whether or not you wanted to indicate a preferred option there, that could be then delegated to officers to agree with the applicant and signed or confirmed through the chairman. So I'm happy to answer any questions in that respect if you've got any later on. This is the proposed materials. Members will have seen much of this from the previous presentation back in September. Three main materials are proposed for use within the site. That's a red stock brick, render and stone to certain feature elevations within the development. And this would all be subject to approval of final samples in line with the conditions on the main report. 20 affordable housing units are proposed within the site in 2 clusters to allow for ease of maintenance by a social landlord. The first cluster is to the western site, part of the site here. And the second is in this sort of central location adjoining, I believe it's Willow Close. Moving on to parking provision within the site is compliant with the local plan requirements. It's made through a combination of on-plot parking for a lot of the properties, either tandem or side by side in some instances, and off-plot parking where the layout can accommodate this without unacceptable impacts on either the visual appearance of the scheme or amenities of the local residents. There is concern highlighted by one of the local residents that set out in the addendum report in relation to the impact in particular of parking here and its proximity to the residential properties over the eastern boundary. As set out in the addendum report, officers consider that separation, boundary treatments and landscaping proposed as part of the scheme are sufficient to ensure satisfactory residential amenity standards in that respect. In terms of, excuse me, in terms of photographs of the site, this is the view taken looking west from Harbour Close, out across the site looking east to west. We then, the photograph on the left is taken sort of looking more northwest from that same position on Harbour Close. And then the photograph to the right is taken looking directly north from the southern end of the site. Harbour Close are the properties that you can see on the right-hand side of the photograph, just here. We then move further into the site, again showing sort of views from inside the site and the adjacent land. Of the existing boundary treatments here and sort of the setting, if you like, of the site, again looking south to north. We then move sort of further to the north part of the site. This is looking around the northern section of where the dwellings are proposed. And as you can see, it's sort of a typical rural field. There is evidence of the ridge and furrow field system on the site. There was a condition on the outline application which required a programme of archaeological work that has been undertaken, and a report is being prepared to satisfy that condition. Again, these are just views of that northern section. This is taken looking along the very northwestern boundary, and then this is taken looking back at those properties on Willow Close. This is the central woodland section that's retained as part of the open space provision within the site. Finally, then this is taken from the very northwest corner, and again that's the central woodland section. This is a view taken back along Stappleford Road, looking east into the village of Whissendine. And then we've got views taken looking. This is back west along Stappleford Road, where the frontage of the site would be. And then this is again taken looking east as you enter the village itself. There are a number of slides that we showed previously. These haven't changed. They show the research that's been undertaken by the applicant in relation to a number of distinctive features that are evident within the built environment of Whissendine, and how those features are incorporated into the property designs for this particular site. These include details such as bay windows, chimneys and gables, window styles, examples of the use of the combinations of materials within the village, coin details, and the symmetry of statement properties, etc. Then just move on to a number of three-dimensional images of the proposed development. Unfortunately, these haven't been updated following the layout changes, but they do give you sort of an indication as to the the character of development that is intended to be provided within the site. Planning policies listed there are those that are set out in the main report. And the main issues in respect to the application, again, as per the main report, obviously you've heard from the chairman this evening, in terms of consideration of the application tonight was the issues but for which the proposal was deferred from the September meeting. The other thing that I should note that has resulted from the layout changes is previously there were 50% of the properties on site were 3 bedrooms or fewer, and that proportion as a result of those plot changes and layout changes has increased to 58%, with 35% now being 4-bedroom units instead of 42 previously. In conclusion, officers can consider that the proposal shows an appropriate density and the type of development proportionate to the site. Development is appropriate in scale and design to the village within which it's located, demonstrating incorporation of distinctive features of the historic form and design of buildings in the village. Surface water drainage has been confirmed by the lead local flood authority as being acceptable. The applicant, following the deferral, has also confirmed that in respect of biodiversity net gain, there are some small improvements within the site, but there are legal agreements progressing with regard to providing off-site improvements within Rutland. In conclusion, final conclusion, therefore, is that officers consider there are no material grounds for refusal of the application, which is therefore recommended for approval, subject to the additional conditions outlined above and in the addendum report, including the amalgamation of conditions 8 and 10 from the main report into one.
Thank you,
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I believe now we're dialing in Mr. Drabble, member of the public opposing the application. If you could make that so. Thank you.
Mr. Drabble, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Before you start the clock, please may I ask the planning officer kindly to show on the screen the developer's layout, not this one, but the next one, which shows the materials, because that shows the, and please could you point out to the committee, because this is what we're going to discuss, where is Willow Close and where is the mass car park to the east of this development?
Thank you, Mr. Drabble. When you mention those, I'll ask the officer to point those out as we go. Your 3 minutes start now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The speculative developer, Messrs. Muller, together with the landowner, have held us all to ransom using the threat of appeal on the Conservative government's poorly written NPPF Clause 8, which is the tilted balance, to force upon us all their unwelcome, unnecessary, and poorly conceived plans in a place where development is not needed. RCC were powerless to resist thanks to having no valid local plan. Now, once again, we see unwelcome, poorly conceived details being foisted upon us by the developer, Mulberry Homes. But this time, the members of this committee are in a position to do something about it. But first, may we reflect on the rightful concept of peaceful amenity for existing properties, where the unnecessary and avoidable effects of noise and light pollution are actually to be avoided or at least minimized according to several fundamental planning policies. Briefly to quote which ones, the National Planning Policy Framework, Clause 130, states that planning policies and decisions should ensure that developments are sympathetic to the local character, including the surrounding built environment, and create places where a high standard of amenity for existing and future users. A core strategy policy CS19, promoting good design, states that the relationship to adjoining buildings shall not cause unacceptable effects by reason of visual intrusion, overlooking, noise, light pollution, or other adverse impacts on local character and amenities. And thirdly, the site allocations policy, DPD policy SP15, states in clause 8.1 that we must have a good standard of amenity for all existing and future occupants of land and buildings. And clause 8.7 says that development is to protect the amenity of the wider environment, neighbouring uses and occupiers in terms of overlooking loss of privacy, noise and other forms of disturbance. Yet, what do we see in this application? We see a dreadful layout with a theft of peaceful amenity from existing properties through mass car parking deliberately put right next to bedrooms, living rooms, bathrooms and gardens of existing properties. Please could you point out where 5 Willow Close is and the mass car parking right next to it? This would mean continual noise from comings and goings, starting and stopping, car doors banging, endless white van deliveries, loud music, general hubbub day and night, plus car headlights pointing directly at existing properties. I stress, this amounts to the theft of peaceful amenity from existing properties. It is then being resold at the other side, that's the west side of the development, where the developer plans to sell nice views over open fields. It is a scandalous
Mr. Travel,
concept.
conclude, please. Your 3 minutes is up.
Okay, may I conclude? I have one short paragraph to conclude. Yep, okay. So such a layout requires significant rework if it is to be provable in compliance with the stated planning policies. Those mass car parks should be moved to the opposite west side of the development, together with the highest density housing, to preserve reasonable quiet amenity to existing properties. And a substantial green buffer zone should be provided between the old and new to preserve quiet amenity and to maintain biodiversity, which is also insufficient in the current plan. These points are all as documented in 3 written representations, together with marked up layouts. And finally, may I respectfully suggest that this matter is an essential responsibility for this committee to safeguard and to resolve. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Committee, questions for Mr. Drabble, please.
Could I just ask, please, Chairman, Mr. Drabble, do you still actually live in Willow Close? I didn't catch that.
I'm the owner of Willow Close, and I have been since Willow Close was developed as a brownfield site. Number 5 Willow Close.
Sorry, okay, you're still there, thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Drabble. In that case, please can I ask our next speaker, Cynthia Moss, member of Whissendine Parish Council, to come forward. Thank you. Your 3 minutes starts when you start speaking. No, that's what I said. When you start speaking, I'm not rushing you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. WPC acknowledges the principle of development on this site. The Whissendine Neighbourhood Plan has passed scrutiny and will be coming to referendum in the spring or early summer. It is therefore a material consideration. WPC acknowledged that the design of the housing units fits the vernacular of the village and thanked Mulberry for their Teams meeting with reference to the new application. However, we still have big problems with the plan submitted. The biodiversity net loss is still a huge 37%, and we are unhappy at the suggestion of off-site mitigation. The hedgerow net gain is higher, but the planting scheme suggests the planting of saplings and whips as replacements to mature hedges. These will take many years to be of any use to wildlife, even if they do survive the onslaught from muntjac deer, rabbits, hares, as well as children in the future. The slight increase in affordable housing is paying lip service to the planners and does nothing to increase the number of 1 and 2 bedroom properties, a strong point in the Whissendine Neighbourhood Plan. The density is still too high for this site, a greenfield site outside the village boundary. Surely it is better to look at the amenity of future and current residents rather than quote the number of dwellings permitted in similar circumstances. In the planning application, the proposal is for 66 houses. 2 lines later down the page, the summary states up to 66. The offer's evaluation states up to 66 houses at point 8 and is referenced later in the summary. At the grant of outline planning permission, Councillor West pointed to Muller's mapping and suggested that they would not be allowed to fill the whole area and would not be allowed that many houses. The WNP commissioned ACOM survey indicated a need for 72 houses between 2022 and 2036, based on previous per annum requirement. Rutland no longer requires all 66 houses in their future housing needs supply. I come back to density. The more units that are allowed on this site, the greater the effect on the village infrastructure and flooding. The two are inextricably linked. Jackson Purdue's drainage reports are saying that all services will be linked into the current Severn Trent sewer system, which runs from Stappleford Road down through Main Street to the substation at the village green and onto the sewage works. Severn Trent manhole number 5413 is quoted as the link manhole. We cannot locate this manhole on the map provided, and nowhere in the documentation for this application can we see any comments from Severn Trent.
Can you please conclude, please?
Yes, may I just finish this? This company is well aware of the failing infrastructure, which has resulted at different times in sinkholes, sewage escapes and collapses, as well as flooding at the stream. We respectfully ask that you consider reducing the number of units to the benefit of the environment, the amenity of current and future residents and of the area and of failing infrastructure.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Councillor West.
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't mention.
No, that's fine. I asked, you mentioned me quite correctly as well. How many units would Whistledown Parish Council like to see on this?
We would like it considerably reduced. If you could take it down to 60 or just below, that would probably help us a great deal. It would give us a lot more space to be able to improve the biodiversity, and it would have much, much less impact on, as I say, the failing sewer system that we have. May I say that the village has been flooded in the centre 5 times in the last few weeks, including very severe damage to the White Horse Pub.
Yes, thank you. Any further questions from the committee? In that case, thank you. And I was going to do it after the next. Councillor Powell, would you like to speak next? I was going to invite you at the end, but yes, if you'd like to speak next. Okay, ward member then agent. So Councillor Powell, if you'd like to speak as ward member. Your 5 minutes starts when you start speaking.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. This revised planning layout now being considered by this committee is a small improvement on the previous one, which was considered on the 19th of September, but it is still not good enough. It still does not go far enough to address the fundamental issues raised at that meeting, which were the reasons for the deferral about density and biodiversity. In essence, 5 4-bedroom houses have been replaced by 5 3-bedroom houses, which is better in compliance with the Whistledown neighbourhood plan, which, as the parish council mentioned, does require more smaller properties. And secondly, as has been stated, 2 properties at the south end of the site has been removed and fitted in elsewhere, but does require the diversion of the footpath, which the planning officer has brought to this committee's attention. A word just about flooding before I go back to the biodiversity and density, because it is all related. The evidence on the ground in the village is that the current system is not even coping at the moment for the existing number of houses in our village. Flooding in the village centre is getting more frequent, and we've had several unprecedented floods in the last couple of months. So really thinking about the effect of an extra 66 houses at the top of a hill on that surface water runoff. So back to the biodiversity and density. As you've heard, the net loss is now just under 38%. It was 45%, which is still a whopping loss for the site, for a site on the edge of a village, while there is a gain in hedgerow units of 46%, up from 29%. This is welcomed, but still not good enough. In the draft local plan, which is currently out for Regulation 18 consultation, it states that development would only be permitted where a biodiversity net gain of at least 15% is demonstrated, and this is above the legal requirement of 10%. The draft policy also stating that only that which cannot be mitigated or compensated for on-site, which will be permitted off-site. Whilst these requirements are not yet enshrined in law, this is our direction of travel, fully supported by all our residents. Come on, Rutland. What's the point of having such emergent policies if they're not translated into planning reality? Indeed, at the full council meeting on the 6th of November, it was confirmed in response to a question that I raised that offsetting should be an absolute last resort. These proposals do not even mention or consider additional measures that could be put in place on the site, including the improvement of the pond area, which was raised at this committee. The developers have gone for the easy option of proposing offset. Neither have they engaged with village residents, which would, I believe, resulted in a much more acceptable and imaginative proposal. The site is still too cramped, although on the numbers it meets overall density requirements. This is evident by the sheer number of tandem parking spaces. Okay, there's sufficient parking, but they're squashed in, narrow roads and lack of street parking. So therefore, I urge the committee to require a better biodiversity net gain on site rather than the one as proposed, and to achieve this, a resultant at least 10% reduction in the number of houses, and also consider a revised mix. The original outline planning permission was given up to 66 houses. We need to demonstrate here in Rutland at high standards that we require for biodiversity and for layout and design. And this is a real opportunity to be a leading example and lay the legacy of this plan, which will be there for many years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee questions? I just have one, Councillor Powell. You say that the developer had not engaged with the parish, but the parish council said they'd had a Teams meeting, which is right.
At the parish council's request and my request, we had one Teams meeting where this revised plan was presented.
So there was some engagement.
I don't call that engagement. Thank you.
Okay. Tomatoes, tomatoes. Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Corby?
Councillor Powell, I'm completely with you on biodiversity net gain. I think the Environment Act says it's all coming into place in January. And I tend to agree with you that, you know, as a council in a rural county, it should be top of our priorities in our consideration in regard to planning. However, having said that, we have to accept sometimes it's not always going to be there. I'm very interested in where you feel the biodiversity net gain could be improved on site. Would that be beneficial, or has that been discussed? Or it appeared to me that you know, it hadn't been discussed. Do you feel there is opportunities to improve that on site?
I would hope there would be. Yes. I mean, I'm not an expert in that field, but just the papers I've seen, it's the sort of, it's the direction of travel. It's not, we really want to do this. These are the limitations. This is what we could do. It's, oh, we can't do it. Let's offset it elsewhere. So I would hope there could be more attention. And that's really what I'm saying, that we should be adopting a very positive attitude to this, and requiring developers to do everything they can, whereas rather than, you know, take a default option. I would hope that there was more opportunity there is obviously the existing wooded area in the middle, which is designated as open space, and a bit more down the bottom now. As I said, there was nothing else proposed on the pond, even though that was raised at the committee. So I would have hoped with a bit less density, there's more opportunity to put in a bit more that would encourage biodiversity.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor, Mr. Slide, do you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of the points that have been raised there. With regard to the number of houses proposed on the site, obviously outline consent was granted for up to 66. That figure is included within the 5-year housing land supply for Rutland County Council that was published back in May this year. So any sort of reduction in that would be reducing the level of that 5-year supply. Secondly, in relation to biodiversity, whilst I fully accept Councillor Powell's point and sort of the principle of increasing biodiversity, the Environment Act comes into force in January next year. There are currently no legal requirements on the development to accord with sort of legislation that is not yet in force. Similarly, with the draft plan, it is out for consultation at the minute. The policies in it don't carry any weight on your decisions this evening. So I understand that the Environment Act also does actually make allowance for biodiversity net gain to be off-site. Appreciate sort of in terms of the aims, obviously, of trying to achieve it on site where possible, but offsetting is permitted in that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered what your opinion was, Councillor Powell, on the public right of way and the route of rerouting of it.
I don't have a specific, the public right of way. I think the important thing for me is it that maintains that sort of the rural feel. In the previous plan actually sort of went through between the houses, which is, I don't think, a good thing at the moment. It's a right of way that goes across a field. I was a bit concerned in the in the details that there was going to be some sort of surface laid on that. I think I would ask for more details. I would want to look in that in consultation probably with the parish council in a bit more detail.
Mr. Chairman, am I right in thinking that the right of way would come potentially to committee anyway?
As I understand it, yes, this planning committee has the power to make decisions on public right of way diversions.
Look at that when the proposal comes forward. Thank you. Any further questions for Councillor Powell? In that case, thank you, Councillor Powell. You're more than welcome to join the debate, but I do need your space. You can come back after the 8th.
May I just say one thing in response?
Yes.
The point was made, and I fully appreciate we're bound by the timings of Environment Act and planning law and legislation and what carries weight. We are in December. We're talking about Environmental Act in January and things gaining momentum. So I'd ask the planning committee to consider the impact of that and whether that might even require a deferral to get an even better design. I think we should be, it's really about setting examples and obviously working within the current regulations, but let's be positive. Let's not use negative reasons for not doing things.
Thank you. Can I ask the agent, please, Mr. Matthew Mortensen, please, to come forward. Thank you, Mr. Mortensen. Your time starts when the red light goes on. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Today, I would like to focus on the positive changes to the proposals following deferral of this application in September. Before I go into those matters in more detail, I would first like to highlight that following the meeting in September, the applicant met with both the Ward Council and the Parish Council to discuss their concerns. At that meeting, a number of alternative layouts were discussed, and the scheme presented to members today represents the preferred option. The fundamental revision of the proposals is the creation of a new area of public open space located in the southern section of the site. This parcel of POS measures 1.47 hectares in size and was previously occupied by 2 residential dwellings, both of which have been incorporated into the layout either for a substitution of house types or a rearrangement of the layout. The proposals therefore result in the provision of 2 areas of POS within the site, comprising the original central POS and the newly provided southern POS. Members will note that the revised scheme provides an overall open space provision of 0.94 hectares, which exceeds that indicatively shown at the outline stage, which provided a total of 0.83 hectares. The applicant has also reconsidered the housing mix. This has resulted in the provision of 5 additional 3-bedroom units, increasing the total number of units with 3 bedrooms or less to 38, or in percentage terms from 50% to 58%. With regards to density, the proposals achieve a density of 19 dwellings per hectare which is significantly below the 30 dwellings per hectare policy requirement set out in the core strategy. The applicant has also conducted an analysis of the density of the existing housing stock in the village, and this finds the density for the following parts of the village as follows: Harbour Close, 24 dwellings per hectare; Sherard Close, 29 dwellings per hectare; Stanley Lands, 23 dwellings per hectare; and Millgrove, 20 dwellings per hectare. This demonstrates that the proposals are both in line and indeed below the existing densities in the village. Finally, with regards to biodiversity, the increase in the amount of open space across the site has resulted in a betterment in the overall BNG deficit from the previous scheme. The legislation with regards to bionet gain that is coming in the Environment Act in January, this would still allow off-site enhancement. So even though the enhancement is going off-site, this is still something that legislation allows and planning policy would allow. In terms of the possible locations of the land bank for the delivery of the off-site credits, I can confirm that the applicant has been in discussions with an appropriate landowner and an appropriate company and has found land banks within Rutland, which will ensure the BNG enhancements will be kept within the county. In response to the objectors and nearby residents' comments, I would just like to say that in terms of the car parking area, which is closest to their residential property, there is a detailed landscaping scheme which will be in place and which will protect residents' amenity. So we do feel that there are provisions in place to protect their amenity with regards to that. And there will be no
the 3 minutes is over.
overlooking on those properties. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee questions? Giles?
Thanks very much. Yes, the first question I've got is, in view of the fact that there was an idea that we've heard expressed from the parish council that they would be happy with 60 houses. I just wondered whether you'd actually consider that in your drawing scheme, rather than what you proposed. And the second point of mine is just, I noticed you talk about vegetation and so on for existing residents, for example, in Willow Close, but it's got to mature for quite a bit, doesn't it? Actually, to be providing a kind of sufficient and mature density to really protect somebody who's got, that amount of parking space behind them. So I just wondered whether, you could clarify those 2 points.
I think firstly, in terms of your first point with regards to the number of units on the site, I think when it's important that when council has made the decision on the application originally, clearly the council didn't have a 5-year supply and significant weight was given to the provision of houses on the site. And that is to my mind, a key benefit of the site. And the provision of 66 houses was something which was granted outline planning permission because it was felt that those dwellings could be provided on the site in a planning policy compliant manner, which has been shown in this application. In terms of the reduction of the units, this is something in terms of for the applicant, their additional costs in developing the site, etc., which would just not make it viable to reduce the number of units. And we feel that we have a good layout which is planning policy compliant in all regards, such that it's meeting the criteria in terms of the core strategy and also the NPPF.
I'm sorry, yes. I was just going to say the point about the maturity of the you said you can obviate the parking behind, for example, Willow Close, but it's quite difficult to actually get, at the foliage to a mature enough level that you're actually going to be doing that for years, I would suggest.
I mean, it's part of the in terms of the conditions, we can have a, specific landscaping condition, or we can have details whereby, some of the planting that goes in there can be, say, maturer, so it has a greater impact.
I'm just thinking if you're in a corner dwelling in Willow Close and you do have a largish car park, then you sort of have a human sympathy that somebody's going to find that slightly off-putting.
I think there's 2 ways to look at it, because we did, when the objection letter was received, it was received quite late in the day, I think, these comments regarding that car parking area next to Willow Close. We did, in fact, actually look at switching the orientation of the houses around there so that the car parking was provided more within the site itself. However, the impact of that would actually be that a greater amount of vegetation on that boundary would have to be removed because there would be a greater conflict with the amenity areas of those dwellings.
Sorry, but just my final point, but you talk about 60, 66, but obviously if you did go down to 60, then you'd obviously make the space perhaps available to allow that exchange between a car park and foliage and protection of existing residents. And you possibly get something that had wider appeal, but thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mortensen, you said that you'd identified areas in Rutland for this offsetting the biodiversity net gain. Can you tell us where those areas are?
I can't, I'm afraid. I don't have those details. It's we have a reservation letter which confirms they're within Rutland, but until any plan permission is granted and the matters start, I don't have the details of exactly where those sites are.
Seems a bit strange. I mean, surely you must, if you've identified them, someone knows where they are.
For legal reasons, they're protected until the legal agreement is finalised. So I can't state at this moment in time. I don't know where they are, but the legal process is underway, and the applicant has had discussions with a land bank company, which has determined that they are within Rutland. What I would say is that there is a condition on the planning recommended, which requests details of the off-site enhancements or biodiversity net gain enhancements to be submitted to the council. So once those details have been finalised, then they would be submitted back to the council for approval.
Okay, so I've had dealings with discussions with the land bank company as a farmer, and I wouldn't touch them with a barge pole. But there we go.
Councillor Smith, then Councillor Robb, then Councillor Payne.
In some ways, my question is similar to Councillor Brown's about the offsetting. I can see the concerns of the parish council and residents, because if this development goes ahead, they have a field taken away with bridge and furrow. It's offset far away from the village. They have no gain. Has not anywhere nearer been considered.
Sorry, Chairman, can I just come in? Just on this point about biodiversity net gain, and obviously the new legislation that's coming in. Just to be clear, it's my understanding that on reserved matters applications, which this is, there will be no requirement for applicants to meet that statutory requirement because the outline was granted prior to the legislation coming in. So it will only technically apply to outline applications and reserved matters applications that are submitted after January. So it wouldn't be something that we could refuse this application on. I think what we've tried to do is go as far as we can in terms of securing some biodiversity net gain and a condition also to try and secure that within Rutland as well.
Yes, I understand that. It's just that I was questioning whether a site nearer to Whissendine had been considered, that's all.
Yeah, I just interjected because I know that there seems to be a lot of member concern about the biodiversity net gain. I just want members to be clear that in terms of the new legislation, that it won't apply to this site.
If I could just say so, just in terms of the conditions, obviously there is that condition on there that's requiring the 10% bio net gain, as the officer just said, that's on top of what is required by the outline planning permission, but the developer's happy to agree that and to deliver that 10% bio net gain. So that is I would say a positive step by the applicant to offer greater biodiversity enhancements than is required by the outline planning permission.
Thank you. Councillor McRobb.
Yes, thank you. It's already been mentioned that the attenuation pond was subject to discussion when this application last came before the committee. And if I'm reading the report correctly, the changes to that part of the site are that it will be surrounded by a timber post and rail fence for security and safety. But there's also in the report where I'm reading an interesting sentence that says a decked viewing platform and a bench will allow it to function more widely as an ecological asset. I'm a bit perplexed by that. How does a bench and a viewing platform add to the ecological value of the pond?
I mean, I would say that ecological, it can be viewed in different ways. There's value ecologically speaking in terms of the ecology itself, but also there's the other side almost where how people can experience it. And I would say if you're giving people an opportunity to go out and view that and have a bench and sit down and perhaps enjoy the environment, that's perhaps another way of enhancing the ecological value in a sense. I understand what you're saying in terms of not specifically being something which is of ecological value, but I think there's different ways to look at it. And I think when we looked at that attenuation pond, we were thinking of ways to perhaps make that part of the site more inclusive rather than it just being, you know, an attenuation pond at the beginning of the site. We wanted to make it a feature of the site that, you know, residents could use or residents could enjoy.
I think we're back in something a bit beyond tomato territory here, Mr. Chairman, because I don't see that those two things are at all equivalent to each other. Ecology is quite a well-defined term. And I think what you're describing as an alternative is something like the environmental amenity for the residents. But I'm not sure that their environmental amenity is a real thing if there is no actual ecology for them to be appreciating. Ecology is quite a specific thing.
Yeah, it is.
Living beings
in
a network of.
And we've had discussions with our landscape architects, and they've obviously worked with, they're in the same company as who our ecologists are, and they've had discussions about the species, etc., that should go into that attenuation pond. So it's the most appropriate to biodiversity. I mean, we've looked at options to, you know, to strengthen our biodiversity position, and that was something we looked at in the application.
Okay, well, if that is the case, then I think the report is not doing you justice. I do have one other question, quick one, please, if I may. Am I right in thinking that your mitigation between the car park and the residents of Willow Close, but that consists entirely of tree planting? Am I right in that?
I have to cast my mind back to the exact detail. I think there's hedgerow on that boundary as well. I mean, we can certainly look at those landscaping details, and if you know, if members wanted a bit more assurance on that, we could strengthen that with a condition where we go in for, you know, so that the council could see the landscaping details in greater detail.
Sorry, yeah, Mr. Stroud, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, just to come back on that, there is obviously a landscaping condition on the outline consent. There is also details of boundary treatment and screen walls and fences. So there is scope within both of those conditions for sort of either the provision of strengthened or more mature landscaping, along with potential for sort of screen fencing around the parking if that's considered necessary and appropriate.
Okay, thank you both.
Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Chair. You did say at the beginning of your speech that this layout was one of the few that you'd put in front of the parish council, and that this was mutually agreed. But when Councillor Powell spoke, she said there wasn't engagement. So was this really approved by the parish council or mutually agreed?
It was. So we had a meeting and we presented, it was either 3 or 4 different layout options. This was the preferred option. That was our understanding from the meeting, that it was the preferred option.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, just kind of, but we've heard from the chairman of the parish council who says that their preferred option is 60. So I don't see how they could have given their assent to something. That wasn't... Sorry.
So
Councillor Payne, would you like to finish? Sorry, Charles, get you all excited. Can we?
It's all right. I think you just finished my job.
This was the preferred option with 66 dwellings on the site.
Thank you. Councillor Payne, 1.
Okay, 3 quick points, Chair, one of which is for you. First point, thank you for keeping the ridge furrows. Give you some positives there because they are unique in Rutland. They're not the same as those ones you get in Leicestershire, which are a much more inferior version. The Rutland ones are much wider and bigger, and there's not so much of them. So thank you for that. Looking at your plan, I'm sorry, to me that still looks cramped. To me, that still looks like you're squeezing in there, and I think it would be a much better development if you could thin it down slightly. And the third thing I must say is to you, Mr. Chairman, I've been sitting here now for over nearly 3 hours, and for a man of my age, that's quite a considerable achievement. And I'm not looking to break any world records. So if you're thinking of a comfort break anytime soon, I'd be most grateful.
Thank you for your input. Are there any more questions for Mr. Mortensen before we carry on? Councillor West.
Thank you, Chairman. Would you consider reducing to 60 dwellings?
I'd say I don't think that's a viable option for the applicant in terms of the cost of the development.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Corby.
Very briefly, Chair. Sorry, biodiversity. Are you happy 100% content that at this point in your design layout that you have discussed and the biodiversity options, that there are no other options in ways that you can increase it, either on site or off site? What I'm trying to get here is, you know, speaking with the planners, including the parish on this. It's going to be an important thing going forward. You know, frankly, I'd love to see the properties with all solar panels and all the rest of it, but the biodiversity net gain is important. And are you happy and content that you've done all you can to ensure that you've achieved the best you can on that side?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously I was here in the meeting in September, and I knew that, you know, biodiversity net gain was one of the key issues. So I was literally on the phone to our ecologist the day after saying, you know, what can you do to try and enhance, you know, get our score up on this site? And, you know, they went away and looked at everything possible within the confines of what is, you know, a viable development for the developer. We maxed it out as much as we could. And then we've had the process of, well, if we can't, you know, we can get so far with on-site enhancements, then the best thing we can do is trying to find off-site enhancements within Rutland itself. So we then went away to find some land within Rutland, and we've got the reservation letter which confirms that. And, you know, we're delivering the off-site enhancements, which is in compliance with the Environmental Act. Even when that comes into power, we would still be in accordance with that in providing the 10% bionet gain off-site, even though it is not technically a requirement of the outline planning permission that's in place. So we did explore everything we could, and then looked for the best possible option in terms of off-site enhancements also.
Thank you. Any further questions, Mr. Mortensen? In that case, thank you, Mr. Mortensen. I've been advised by our team of legal experts that unfortunately we can't take a break to the end of this item. I say no more.
I mean, if members are struggling, then of course we can adjourn for a short period, but I think it would be preferable if we could get to the end of this item before a comfort break.
Well, I'll do my best.
Thank you. Councillor Powell, would you like to join us again, or are you quite happy sat like that? Still up to you. Thank you. As ward member, Councillor Powell is allowed to join in the debate, but obviously not vote. Questions for the committee, for the officers, please. Councillor Wilby.
Thank you, Chair. We obviously rely on our professional advice to a huge extent on all these things. Now, given the spotlight that is on sewage and drainage and things like that at the moment, are you really content that a building this number of houses in this sort of area is going to be, the Americans have a word, copacetic, you know, are they going to be able to cope with that, or down line, are we going to find ourselves embarrassed because we can't deal with all the sewage and water problems that come from a large build in a country estate.
So there are two aspects to it. Obviously, the foul sewage is the responsibility of Severn Trent. They've been consulted on the application and they've raised no objection. In respect to the surface water drainage, as was the position hasn't changed since September. There is a requirement on the outline consent to limit runoff from the site to 5 litres. That is below the existing greenfield runoff rate of the site. And in looking at the plans that have the initial sort of outline surface water drainage proposals that have been provided, the officer was satisfied that that could be achieved. So in that respect, I can't really say any more other than the proposals have been assessed. There is a restriction on the site, and it was found to be acceptable.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Am I right in thinking that they've got outline planning permission for 66 dwellings? So us spending ages talking about lower numbers is pointless.
Sorry, through you, Chairman. I think the original outline was up to 66. I think the applicants made it clear tonight that the scheme's not viable if it is less than what's proposed. And what I would say is that those 66 dwellings have been taken into account in our 5-year housing land supply. So if we seek to reduce numbers off this, that does impact our supply. But my honest answer is I think you should assess the application based on the scheme that's before you tonight. And if you are unhappy with the 66 dwellings, then you would need to find sufficient reasons to refuse the application, I would suggest.
Thank you. Committee questions. Councillor West.
Thanks, Chairman. I think we've done the biodiversity net gain. I think, for me, that's done and dusted. We've asked the applicant to go away and try a bit harder. They have gone away. They've tried a bit harder. They've brought the biodiversity net gain into Rutland. I think we have to take them at face value on that. Our officers are going to continue to monitor this. They're not just going to go off and buy some peatland in Scotland and forget about it. So for me, that box is ticked. When I proposed the deferral of this in September, I wasn't happy about the layout on the south section. It's better now. I'm happier with that. I think I'd like to see the footpath come as a separate application back to committee. Not that I've got any specific concerns, but I think it'd just be nice to look at it a little bit more closely, but that can come at another time. And the density, as the applicant has said, is lower on this site than other developments already within the village. I think we would be pretty hard pressed, as Justin has said, to ask the applicant to lower that even further. It's at 19 dwellings per hectare rather than 23 elsewhere in the village. I think if we took that down to 60, that makes it 17.3 dwellings per hectare, which is quite a big drop in the context of those numbers of 19, 20, 21, 23. To come down to 17.3 is a big drop. I take on board, the views of the parish council that they would like this brought down to 60. I've got enormous sympathy for that. There's similar developments in my own ward in Cottesmore that have been proposed where we have, a lot of houses proposed, and the parish council would like to see a smaller development, and we're trying to get smaller developments on that site. It's very difficult. Particularly, here the outline permission has already been granted. In Cottesmore, we haven't not at that stage, so we have a little bit more leverage for here. I would be struggling to find a reason for refusal or further deferral here, members.
Other questions from committee? Councillor McGrath.
Yes, I'm wondering, going back to the question of parking and screening, I'm wondering what scope there is in the conditions to toughen that up a bit for the sake of residents on the existing side of that boundary.
Yeah, I think as I said earlier, there are conditions for both landscaping and boundary treatments, screen walls and fencing. So there is certainly scope to ensure that that is sort of a focus of any proposals under the discharge of those conditions. I think it's certainly something that Justin and I we've fully taken on board the concerns of the members here. So if the application were to be approved this evening, then when those details come forward, it's certainly something that would be at the forefront of our minds.
So I was just going to add, because we've already got conditions proposed that cover the key concerns, I would suggest perhaps just an informative on the decision notice to advise that when those details are submitted, we will be looking for sufficient separation between the properties or screening, so to ensure in terms of noise and I believe it was light pollution, wasn't it, in car lights.
Okay, thank you. And can I put another question, Mr. Chairman? There's a suggestion that if we were to insist that the development reduce to 60, that the developer would pull out and we would lose 5 from our planned housing supply. I'm just wondering what the officer view is on the relative risk of that versus us refusing the application altogether and losing all 66.
Well, I mean, I think the issue would be is that if the developer pulled out, you potentially lose all 66 rather than that, but someone may come in and come up with a scheme. I think the issue is you've heard from the developer tonight. They've said that in their terms, they think they need 66 to make it viable. We have to determine the planning application that's before us. We can't start redesigning the scheme and requiring reduction. So I think you need to make a decision, and if your decision is that for planning reasons that scheme before you tonight is not acceptable, then you refuse the scheme. That would be my way forward.
Right, can I
Okay,
just add-
thank you.
Sorry, can I just have members, you will obviously be aware of this, but obviously if this scheme before you is refused tonight, that would obviously give the applicant a right of appeal. So requesting that the applicant comes back with a reduced scheme, they obviously do have the ability to go back and appeal this scheme.
Thank you. Committee, any other further questions? Councillor Corby.
Yeah, I'm obviously, probably like we all are to a certain extent, conflicted. But, we do have to look at the application as it is. There's outline planning permission for 66 hectares here. I concur with Councillor West that we have questioned, and I believe that they have done enough with regard to the NG. Might not be satisfactory in my mind, but I think we have to come to a pragmatic decision here with regard to the decision we make.
Thank you. Any further questions? If that is the case, the motion in front of us is to recommendation of approval. Can I please have a proposer? Councillor Smith, seconded Councillor Payne. All those in favour? And those against?
That's 10 for and 1 against. That's carried.
Thank you. At this point, we shall take a 2-minute comfort break. Don't all race at once.
I think it was better to get the other case.
Yes, thank you, Highways. We thought we'd release you back to the wild. Are we all? Is everybody back? Thank you. So we'll restart the meeting with 5D0944 FL land off Main Street, Liddington, demolition of existing agricultural building and construction of 1 new dwelling. Recommendation for approval. Magda is to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So as Chairman mentioned, the application is for the demolition of the existing agricultural building and construction of the one number of new dwelling. The application site is effectively outside of or approaching to the Liddington, to the village Liddington, outside of the planned limits for development. So consider or classify as within the open countryside. The slide, the picture on the left-hand side, pointing the site, and on the right-hand side, the visibility of the site from the road once approaching from Mappingham. The site is also, like I mentioned, the site holds residential planning permission in principle approved under prior approval of Class Q proposal, commonly known as a fallback position. And this is a significant material planning consideration. The site, this slide showing the proposed elevation and floor plans under the prior approval Class Q planning application. The next application and the next slide represent the approved planning decision for the access to the site with the driveway and gates. That's the left-hand side, that's the view from the access towards the site. The right-hand side photo showing the leftovers pretty much or remaining of the structure, which will be demolished, and a surrounding of the site. That's again the structure which will be demolished and replaced with a new dwelling. That's the so proposed residential cartilage and approved access to the site, which is no different, which slightly increasing on the on the western boundary. However, majority remain as approved by the prior approval. Oops, and that's what is proposed at the moment. So the proposal is on an existing footprint, so the footprint won't be increased. The size of the dwelling will be a little, the floor space will be slightly increased. However, the height of the dwelling would remain the same by the fact that the ground will be excavating and lowering the proposed dwelling, basically. So the main issue, the architectural design and materials of the proposed dwelling is pretty much referred to the traditional rural barn and correspond to the surrounding. The proposal would not have an adverse impact on the village historic environment or any residential amenity of neighboring property. It is therefore considered that the proposal is acceptable subject to planning condition attached to the design.
Thank you, Magda.
So Chairman, I was just going to pick up on one point just to be very clear on this. There has been, I think this plan showed it best. This building here was approved under the Class Q, which Magda showed earlier. The proposal is effectively, rather than build the Class Q, is to now replace it as a separate dwelling using the Class Q as the fallback position. The buildings are of similar size, and as Magda said, they're getting some extra floor space by putting in a second level, and they're doing that by digging down. So the overall ridge height of the building is no higher than the existing one. So on that basis, recommended for approval, Chairman. Thank you.
We have one speaker. Can I ask Sophie Harford to speak on behalf as agent? Thank you. You have 3 minutes from when your red light goes on.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. So I'm Sophie and my partner Lewis is here as well this evening. First of all, I'd like to thank Magda for all your support in the Q-Class application, the pre-app and this final application. So we'd like to just give you some extra information about ourselves. So we have both lived in Rutland for most of our lives. I went to Uppingham C of E and Lewis went to Gretton Primary. And then we both attended Uppingham Community College. We're both in our 30s. I'm 32 and Lewis is 33, and we have a young daughter, Ava, who is 2 this July. We're local people and we want to make our home within Rutland. Lewis has a very close link to Liddington. His grandfather has a farm tenancy in the village and has worked the land for over 30 years. And Lewis joined the contracting business when he left school and has now subsequently taken over from his grandfather. Now he's retired. Lewis provides agricultural contracting services to many of the local farmers within Rutland, and as you previously heard, to Andrew, which is why he's not part of this. There have been no objections to the application other than the parish council, who have raised 3 points which I'd like to address. So firstly, they flagged up a concern at the time of the Q class approval that it could lead to a subsequent application for a much bigger or more houses on our site. Secondly, that approving this application will set a precedence for similar future development. And thirdly, the application site is outside of the village boundary. So to address their first point of the Q class consent, this application, as you can see, is for a single dwelling built on the same footprint of the existing approval we have for the Q class. It will be the same height as the permitted scheme and is largely the same mass and scale, but represents a much more efficient and sustainable home than the permitted scheme we have with the Q class. The proposed design is significantly more in keeping with the countryside than what we could achieve with the permitted development. To address their second point, the legal precedent has already been set and the application details the case law back to the application. And to address the outside of the village boundary, it has been acknowledged that we are outside of the village boundary and dealt with by additional proposals for bionet gain, landscape enhancement, and a more sustainable house on the site. This accords with the local and national policies as confirmed by the officer's recommendation to approve our application. And we'd just like to emphasise that the bionet gain from the site is over 123% in this full application in comparison to the Q class. So hopefully you agree with us and Magda's recommendation for approval for our application. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to present our case.
Thank you very much. Committee, any questions? Councillor West.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much. Normally, when we see a Class Q approval and then a new design, we see more traditional design. So people do a Class Q application for converting a shed into a house. I've never seen someone say, I don't want to convert a shed, I want to build a new shed. This still looks like a shed. Now that's fine, that's what you want. I just wonder why you've gone for quite an industrial looking shed in your new scheme rather than sticking with the old Class Q, which was basically the same kind of design.
So it was primarily to be more in keeping with the agricultural roots, as it's still going to be in the open countryside. So rather than stick a red brick house that you'd expect, it was to be more in keeping so it doesn't stand out and sits well within the landscape.
Thank you. Any other questions? No, that case, thank you very much. Committee, open to debate and questions, please. Giles.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Well, I think as a matter of principle, which is, you know, a matter of opinion, I think we should obviously try and keep people in Rutland, particularly younger people, making their careers here. I think that I would concur with the view of the professional advisors that it's there's no reason to oppose this, and so I would support it.
Hans.
Yeah, similar as Class Q has already been permitted. I really can't see any problems with this application.
Thank you. Just my 2 pence worth. I've fought Class Q for many years, but it's nice to see somebody come in and make an honest approach to developing Class Q. And I very much take on board the fact try to create something that will fit in with the natural landscape. It's a breath of fresh air. So thank you. Councillor Smith.
No, I'd just like to say, I really like the design and I certainly approve of the application.
Thank you. Well, if there's no further questions, we move to recommendation to approve. Please can I have a proposer? Councillor Wilby, a seconder, Councillor West. All those in favour?
It's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. Does Magda want to stay or you? Oh, you're too, wow. You're on over to overtime now. In that case, we will move to the next application, which is 1057 Full 30 Alexander Crescent, Oakham, single story front and rear extension and new porch. I believe this has come to committee because Hans, you're our architect, so declare yes, so could you please disappear? Magda to present the report.
As, thank you, Chair. That's as Chairman mentioned, it's just like the because of the one of the councillor is the planning agent for this application. So the application, the site application is one of the Oakham residential estate, and it is a corner house, as you see on the slide. And a proposal is for just the very simple rear extension and a small projection to the front, including the porch. So there is no objection for the proposal. The modest increase will not affect the property and residential amenities. So there is sorry, that's the design. Neighboring properties around a similar extent. So a recommendation for approval.
Thank you. Any questions for Magda? The Councillor McGrath.
It's not even a question.
Let's run with it.
Probably just as well. It's not even a question. I just wanted to say as ward councillor that I can see no reason to object to this.
Would you like to propose the motion to approve?
Yes, I will propose.
There we go. With gusto, let us vote.
Is this in favour?
In favour, yes.
It's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, go and get Hans. Wind him up a bit. Right, enough of this frivolity. This is a serious planning meeting. Too dense it was, I'm afraid. You have to increase your biodiversity, make it out of grass. The next application is 0847 LB8, a listed buildings application. Again, this has come to us because it is Councillor Johnson's property. Again, Magda to present.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as Chairman mentioned, another application where the applicant is one of the member of the council. The application is simply for the maintaining and preserving the heritage asset. As you see on the slide, there are some patches where is currently the lime or mortar is replaced, and I think so on the left hand side there is how it looks beforehand. So there is no that's right hand side. This is with the old fillings, left hand side with the new fillings. No objection from the conservation officer. Visited the site with the conservation officer, happy for the I'm sorry for a little happy for the type of material and effect of the work. So then no new harm occur on a heritage asset. Again, subject for approval, the recommended for approval.
Thank you, Magda. Any questions?
I would just say thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Councillor Johnson's fellow councillor for the ward, I think it's slightly strange, to be honest, that somebody has to come and actually ask to have, you know, permission to be the repointing. It would be much easier. It was just done in-house, but I think we can commend Councillor Johnson for tearing himself away so often from his lovely home on council business.
Thank you. Therefore, Giles, would you like to propose this? Could we please have a seconder? Councillor Rob was slightly there first. All those in favour?
Unanimous, Chair.
Unanimous, Chair. Thank you. Thank you. We move on to a quick skip through of the appeals report.
Thank you, Chairman. The bottom of page 121, this is just to confirm that we've got the appeal in for the land off Manor Green in Ketton. This was a relatively large residential development for 41 dwellings, which we refused. And the reasons for the refusal are set out at the top of page 122. Which was, again, it was in open countryside and didn't comply with our policies in relation to that, and we now could demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. So we're defending the point on that. And then we've had a recent appeal decision, which was the land to the east of Normanton Road, Edith Weston, which was the outline application for 62 dwellings, and that appeal was dismissed and there were no costs awarded on that one. So a successful appeal on that. No other appeals to raise today.
Thank you. Justin, for next week, it might be interesting to just get an update on what your strike rate is, so to speak. Unless you know what it is on appeals.
I will email it round. I had a look for this year. I think we've lost one out of all of the ones we've had, and we've had a fair few. I'll send the figures round. I think there were still some coming in from 2022. I think the ones from 2022, we'd had 24 applications that year, and I think we'd lost 8. But what I'll do is I'll send round an email that gives you sort of the score and the reasons why.
It's just interesting to just help back up the officers' decisions. And 22, I think, was probably an outlier because of the 5-year housing supply.
I think it was an issue there. And I think there were some where we'd lost as officers delegated, and there were some that were lost off the back of committee decisions and our 5-year housing land supply. Like I say, this year, it's been pretty successful, but I'll send the figures round. Yeah. Our best. We will do our best, and I think we've got a good case. I think certainly the decisions that we've had come back in recently on the 5-year housing land supply, they've all been supporting and upholding the actual figures that we've got, and also the policies, because some agents have tried to claim that because our local plan is so old, they're trying to claim that the policies are out of date. But thankfully, we've been successful in defending that position, and claiming that, with the exception, I think, of one policy, all of them we've claimed are up to date. And the policy that isn't, it's just the housing numbers that are in it that are at issue.
Just interesting aside. I attended on Friday levelling up agenda in regard to local plan, and it's quite deep there. But in terms of some of what they're saying is potentially, I mean, whether you guys are looking at it at the moment, in terms of planning decisions or local plans may be taken over by the state as such if ours does not come to meet with expectations. What's your take on that at the moment?
Well, I think we're in a fairly good position. I think we're on a tight time frame in terms of I think the way in which local plans need to be adopted, I think, is due to change, and there's a sort of transition period that we're in. So we need to stick to our timetable to make sure that we hit that transition period. But otherwise, I think we're in a good position. Clearly, there are examples that are in the planning press at the moment where some authorities have refused to adopt their own plan of Office of Advice. And they are having, or they will potentially be taken to task by the government, and potentially the government, you know, can take control if they are that disgruntled with it. I think, yeah, that there's one, I can't remember which authority it is, but there was one that had just voted on 2 occasions not to adopt their own local plan. So yeah, yes, quite.
Seven, any other business? There's none to consider, I believe. Date next meeting is Tuesday, the 16th of January. So happy Christmas, happy New Year. And thank you for your attentiveness tonight in what was a long meeting.